I was holding the pen when Diane walked through the door. The signature page was open on the table in front of me. 3 copies, paper-clipped, each one flagged with a yellow tab at the line where I needed to sign. 40 years of work. 7 stores across 3 counties. Walsh hardware, built from 1 rented space and a truck full of tools, worth $4,200,000 according to the independent valuation I had commissioned 2 years earlier. The Hartwell Home Supply Acquisition Agreement had it at $2,900,000. 31% below market. My daughter Emma had explained this over 3 dinners and 2 phone calls. She had said the market was shifting, that independent hardware was being squeezed, that Hartwell's offer was fair given the trajectory of the sector. She had said a lot of things. The pen was in my hand. I was about to sign. Then the door opened, and Diane came in from the cold, still in her coat, 6 hours of driving on her face, and she looked at the papers on the table and she looked at me and she said, without preamble, without apology for arriving unannounced at 7 in the evening, "Dad, don't sign anything." I had not spoken to Diane in 11 days. She had called twice in the preceding month and I had not called back because Emma had told me Diane was going through a difficult period and that her negativity about the sale was coming from a personal place rather than a professional one. I had believed this because Emma was the daughter I had always believed and Diane was the daughter I had always found difficult. I had them backwards. I had them backwards for 45 years. I put the pen down. Subscribe to the Steady Father. Because what Diane brought through that door on a Tuesday evening in December is the story of what a daughter does when she has 6 hours to drive and 1 chance to stop something that cannot be undone, and what a father does when he finally understands that the daughter who was always difficult was the one who was always telling him the truth. I built the first Walsh hardware store in 1987, in a rented space on the east side of the city, with $12,000 in savings and a commercial loan that required Dorothy to co-sign because my credit history at that point was insufficient on its own. I was 37 years old. I had been a firefighter for 14 years. I had watched my father spend his entire working life employed by other people, and I had carried through my own years of shift work and emergency calls and the physical toll of a firefighting career, the quiet conviction that I wanted to build something that was mine before the body made the building impossible. Dorothy believed in it before I fully believed in it myself. She was not an optimistic woman in the general, unfounded sense. She assessed situations carefully and accurately, and when she told you something was going to work, it was because she had done the assessment honestly rather than because she wanted it to be true. She told me Walsh hardware was going to work in 1986, when it was still a business plan on the kitchen table. By 1995 we had 3 stores. By 2005 we had 5. By 2015, the year I retired from day-to-day operations and handed management to Emma, we had 7 stores across 3 counties, annual revenue of $4.8 million, and 43 full-time employees who had been with us an average of 11 years. Dorothy died in 2021, 3 years before the events of this story. She died in the spring, after a winter that had made clear the cancer was not going to be managed into remission, in the house we had bought in 1991, with the specific dignity of a woman who had decided how she wanted to face the end and had faced it exactly that way. She left 2 things relevant to this story. She left a business I believed was in good hands with Emma. And she left a cedar box in the back of her closet that I did not open for 2 years, because the box was labeled in her handwriting and the handwriting was the last version of her I had physical access to, and I was not ready to close that access by reading what was inside. I opened it on the night before I confronted Emma. What was in it changed the way I understood my entire family. Emma Louise Walsh was born in 1979 and she was, from the beginning, the daughter who made things easy. The teachers loved her. The other parents loved her. She had friends without apparent effort. When she graduated with her MBA and came to Walsh Hardware as operations manager, the employees responded to her within 6 months the way employees respond to good managers, with the loyalty of people who feel seen and valued. I was proud of her. I am still proud of the version of her that was real, which I now understand was most of the version I had access to. Diane Christine Walsh was born in 1982 and she was, from the beginning, the daughter who made things harder. Not because she was unkind or irresponsible. Because she was honest in the specific, unwavering way that is comfortable to be around only after you have come to terms with the fact that the honesty is not negotiable. She would tell you what she thought. Not harshly. Not with any pleasure in the discomfort. But clearly, directly, and without the softening that most of us apply to difficult truths to make them easier to deliver. Dorothy used to say that Diane had been born without the social filter that most people develop in childhood. I used to take this as a gentle way of explaining why Diane was difficult. I understand now that Dorothy meant it as a compliment. Diane studied accounting and then financial compliance. She worked in regulatory auditing for a decade before moving into the private sector. She lived 6 hours away. She called regularly, less often than Emma but more substantively, the calls tending toward real information about her actual life rather than the cheerful maintenance calls Emma made weekly. I found Emma easier. I always had. Dorothy had tried to tell me this. Not once, several times, over several years, in the direct way she had of pointing at things I was not quite seeing. She would say, "Henry, Diane tells you the truth. You should call her more." And I would say, "Diane makes everything into an argument." And Dorothy would look at me with the expression she wore when she had said something I had not received correctly and had decided to let settle rather than press. She let it settle for 20 years. And then she died. And 6 months later Emma became managing director. And 2.5 years after that I was sitting at a table with a pen in my hand. And Diane came through the door. The Hartwell approach began 18 months before the Tuesday evening in December. Emma came to me in June with what she called a strategic opportunity. Hartwell Home Supply was one of the 3 largest home improvement retail chains in the region. They had been expanding their independent acquisition program, buying established local hardware operations and integrating them into the Hartwell network while maintaining the local branding and staff. Emma had been in discussions with their acquisition team and she said she believed, that the timing was right for Walsh Hardware to consider a transition. I listened. I was skeptical. I told her I would think about it. She came back in August with numbers. The offer framework was $2,900,000 for the full business. She had a presentation, professionally prepared, that made the case for why this number was appropriate given market conditions and the challenges facing independent retail. I was more skeptical. I told her to get an independent valuation. She came back in October with the independent valuation. $4,200,000. She said the Hartwell offer, while below the valuation, needed to be understood in the context of the certainty it provided. The certainty premium argument. The discount reflecting the value of a guaranteed transaction versus the uncertainty of the open market. And then she said something that I have thought about almost every day since December. She said it calmly. She said it with the specific warmth of someone who believes they are being practical on another person's behalf. She reached across the kitchen table and put her hand on mine and she said, "Dad, you're 72. The stores need someone who can take them into the next decade. That's not going to be you. Hartwell gives you the exit that protects your legacy while you're still healthy enough to enjoy what comes next." She was not wrong about my age. She was not wrong that I could not run 7 stores for another decade. She said it with the warmth of someone who genuinely believed she was helping me. And I received it as help. Because she said it with warmth, and because I found her easy, and because that is what the management produces. You receive the management as love because it is delivered in the form of love, and the form is so consistent and so practiced that it does not occur to you to ask what is underneath it. What was underneath it was $336,000 going to her husband upon closing. I did not know that yet. I did not know that for another 2 months, when Diane drove 6 hours on a Monday evening because Tuesday was too close to wait. But I have thought about that moment at the kitchen table, Emma's hand on mine, the warmth, the gentleness, the specific word legacy, and I have thought about what it felt like to receive it as kindness and what it was actually doing, which was making it easier for me to sign papers that would make her husband very wealthy at the cost of $1.3 million of my life's work. The question Emma did not answer, the question I did not ask, because I trusted Emma, was why she was so committed to this specific buyer at this specific price. I found out in December. From Diane. Diane called me on a Monday in early December and asked if she could come for dinner Thursday. I said yes, expecting a holiday visit. She arrived at 6:30. She came through the door and hugged me and sat at the kitchen table and said, "Dad, I need to tell you something." She put a folder on the table. Inside were printed documents, business registration records, financial filings, a corporate organizational chart. She said, "I stopped at the Riverside store last Tuesday. There were 3 men in suits in the back office with Emma. I recognized the Hartwell logo on one of their folders." I said, "Emma has been discussing a potential acquisition with Hartwell. I'm aware of it." She said, "Dad, look at the second page." I looked. It was a business registration record. Hartwell Home Supply's acquisition subsidiary had a list of registered consultants. One of them, registered 4 months earlier, was Gregory Marsh Consulting LLC. Gregory Marsh was Emma's husband. I looked at the registration date. 4 months earlier. 3 months after Emma had first raised the Hartwell opportunity with me. Greg had registered a consulting company 3 months after the Hartwell discussions began. The company was registered as a consultant to the acquisition subsidiary that would buy Walsh hardware. I put the paper down. I looked at Diane. She said, "There's a consulting fee structure in Hartwell's standard acquisition agreements." I found 3 of their previous deals in the public record. The consulting fee in each case was between 7 and 12% of the acquisition price. 7 to 12% of $2,900,000. Up to $348,000. To Greg. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then I said, "How long have you known?" She said, "I suspected when I saw the men in the store. I confirmed it this weekend. Why didn't you call me?" I said. She looked at me directly. "Because the last 2 times I raised concerns about something Emma was doing, you told me I was being negative and that I needed to work on my relationship with her. I decided I needed to come in person, with documents, so the information could be evaluated on its merits rather than dismissed as Diane being difficult. I had nothing to say to this." She was right. I had said exactly that, both times. I looked at the documents again. I said, "I haven't signed anything yet." She said, "I know. The closing is scheduled for next Tuesday." I checked the Hartwell acquisition calendar. She paused. "Dad, I drove 6 hours tonight because next Tuesday was too close to wait. I did not sign that week, or the next. I told Emma on Friday I had additional questions and was engaging an independent attorney before executing." She received this with the smoothness of someone who has managed difficult conversations professionally. She said, "Of course. She understood. She wanted me to feel comfortable. She said this with complete composure. I watched her say it and tried to see what Diane had seen and could not yet see it. I was still seeing Emma as the daughter I had always trusted. The 7 days between that Friday and the following Friday changed everything. Day 1. I called James Whitfield, a business attorney with no relationship with Emma and no knowledge of the Walsh hardware situation. He asked 3 questions Emma had not asked, one of which was, has anyone reviewed the consulting arrangements associated with this transaction? I told him about Greg's company. He was quiet, then said, I'll need the full acquisition agreement and any related party disclosures. Can you get those today? Day 2. James called with his initial read. Greg's consulting arrangement appeared nowhere in the acquisition agreement documentation Emma had provided me. The failure to disclose a material financial interest of her spouse in the transaction she was recommending was, in James's assessment, a significant breach of fiduciary duty. Day 3. I called Frank Caruso, my financial advisor of 12 years, and asked him to review the Hartwell offer against the independent valuation. He called back that afternoon. The offer was at the low end of any defensible range. The retained liability provisions and earn-out terms were less favorable than standard. He would have flagged these issues if asked to review the agreement. He had not been asked. Emma had not involved my financial advisor. She had presented the offer, the valuation, and the argument for the discount, and suggested I sign. Day 4. Diane called. She had found the consulting fee structure in 2 more completed Hartwell acquisitions. The average fee across 5 transactions, 9.8%. 9.8% of $2,900,000 was $284,000. To Greg. For consulting on a deal his wife was negotiating with her father's company. Day 5. James found something I had not anticipated. In reviewing the supporting documents, he found a letter of intent dated 11 months earlier, 5 months before Emma first raised the Hartwell opportunity with me. The letter of intent was between Hartwell's acquisition subsidiary and the authorized representative of Walsh Hardware. Emma had been in discussions with Hartwell for 5 months before she told me about it. Day 6. I sat in my truck outside the Riverside store for 40 minutes. Looking at the store that had been in operation for 18 years. 21 employees. Regular customers who came in by name and were known by name. I thought about Dorothy. About the first store in 1987 and the $12,000 in savings and what she had said when we signed the lease. Now we need to make it worth what we just committed to. 40 years of making it worth what we committed to. Day 7. James called. He had obtained the full consulting agreement between Hartwell's acquisition subsidiary and Gregory Marsh Consulting LLC. The consulting fee was $336,000. Payable upon closing. Emma had never mentioned this. Not once. In 18 months of conversations about the sale of my company, my daughter had not told me that her husband would receive $336,000 from the buyer. I called Diane. I said, I need you to come back. She was there by Saturday morning. Emma came to the house Saturday morning for what she believed was a routine update on the timeline. She arrived at 9, dressed professionally, with the specific put-together quality that had always been one of the things I associated with her. Diane was already at the kitchen table when Emma came through the door. Emma stopped in the doorway. The pause was brief, a professional's recovery from an unexpected situation, and then she smiled and said, Diane. I didn't know you were going to be here. Diane said, Hi, Em. I poured Emma's coffee. I sat across from her. Diane sat to my left. I said, "Emma, I want to ask you about the consulting arrangement." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Which consulting arrangement?" "The one between Hartwell's acquisition subsidiary and Gregory Marsh Consulting LLC, I said. "Greg's company." The quality of Emma's stillness in the moment after I said this told me more than the documents had. Not guilt exactly. The stillness of a person who has been running a calculation and has just received new information about what the other party knows. She said, "Greg does consulting work in the home improvement retail sector. Hartwell engaging him in his area of expertise isn't." "Emma," I said. "The company was registered 4 months ago. 3 months after you first raised the Hartwell opportunity with me." She looked at me. $336,000, I said. "Payable on closing." The kitchen was very quiet. She said, "Dad, I can explain the context." "Before you do," I said, "I want to tell you something." I put my hands flat on the table. 40 years of firefighting and 40 years of building had put specific marks on those hands, and I looked at them for a moment. I have been reviewing this transaction for the past week with James Whitfield and Frank Caruso. I know about the letter of intent from 11 months ago. I know you were in discussions with Hartwell for 5 months before you told me. I know about the consulting fee. I know the offer is 31% below valuation, and I have Frank's assessment of the transaction structure. Emma was looking at the table. "I am not going to sign the Hartwell agreement," I said. "I want to tell you that directly." She looked up. "Dad." "I'm not finished," I said. "I am also not going to make decisions about Walsh Hardware or our relationship until I understand the full picture. What I want right now is honest answers. Can you give me that?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I should have told you about Greg's arrangement." "Yes," I said. "You should have." I convinced myself it was separate. "That is work for Hartwell, and my recommendation to you were." "They were not separate," I said. "You know they were not separate." She looked at her coffee. She looked like someone who had arrived at a destination they had not intended and who was beginning to understand that the way back was not available. Diane, who had not said a word since Emma sat down, said quietly, "He built it for 40 years." Emma looked at her sister. Something passed between them, the specific language of two sisters who have known each other their entire lives. Then Emma said, "I know." The confrontation with Emma was scheduled for Saturday morning. On Friday night I sat alone in the living room in the chair I had always sat in, Dorothy's chair empty across from mine, and I understood that I did not yet have what I needed. Not the documents. The documents were complete. James had everything. Diane had everything. The consulting fee was documented, the letter of intent was dated, the forgery of a legitimate process was established in full. What I did not have was the thing Dorothy had been trying to give me for 20 years. The understanding of my own daughters. The permission to trust the one I had always found difficult and to receive with clear eyes what the one I had always found easy had actually done. I sat in the living room for a long time. Then I got up and went to the bedroom and opened the back of the closet and took out the cedar box. I had not opened it in 2 years. The label was in Dorothy's handwriting. "For Henry, when you need it." I had been not opening it since the spring she died, carrying it through 2 apartment reorganizations, moving it carefully each time, because the handwriting was the last version of her I had physical access to and I had not yet been ready to close that access. I needed it now. I sat on the edge of the bed and I opened the box. Inside were letters, cards, photographs, the accumulated papers of a life lived attentively. And a sealed envelope, labeled, "For Henry, when you need it." I opened it. Inside was a letter. 4 pages. Dorothy's specific and unhurried hand. Dated 8 months before she died, written when she still had time and full clarity and the specific purpose of a woman who understood exactly what she was preparing and why. She wrote about the marriage, about the stores, about what she had loved and what she had wished she had said more directly. Near the end, she wrote about the girls. She wrote, "I want to tell you something about Emma and Diane that I have been trying to tell you for 20 years and that I have not been able to make you hear in the way it needs to be heard. I am going to try one more time, in writing, in the hope that the form does what the conversation has not. Emma is easy to love. She has always been easy to love. She is warm and competent and she manages relationships with a skill that I have admired and that I have also watched carefully for many years. What I want you to understand is that Emma's warmth is genuine and Emma's management of relationships is also genuine, and that these two true things coexist in her in a way that makes it very difficult to see where the warmth ends and the management begins. Diane is difficult to love. She has always been difficult to love, in the specific way that people who do not manage you are difficult. They require you to do the work of the relationship yourself rather than having it done for you. What I want you to understand is that Diane's difficulty is entirely located in her refusal to make herself easier at the expense of making herself less honest. She will not soften the truth to manage your feelings. She has never been able to do this. Here's what I want to say, as directly as I can. The daughter who is difficult is the one who will tell you the truth regardless of what it costs her to tell it. The daughter who is easy is the one whose love for you and whose love for smooth waters will always be in tension when the truth creates rough ones. This is not a judgment of Emma. It is an accurate description of two people I love completely and differently. I always hoped you would figure this out while I was still here to see it. I am writing this in case you need it after I am gone. If you are reading this because something has happened that required Diane to tell you something difficult, and I believe something like this will happen, because Diane's honesty will eventually be needed in a situation where Emma's management cannot cover what needs to be seen, I want you to know that Diane was not being difficult. She was being Diane. She was being the truest version of herself, at whatever cost it required, because that is the only version of herself available to her. Love her for it. It is the rarest thing available in a family. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. Then I folded the letter. I put it in the inside pocket of my jacket, against my chest, where I would have it in the morning. In the morning I would need it. Emma came to the house Saturday morning for what she believed was a routine update on the timeline. She arrived at 9, dressed professionally, with the specific put-together quality that had always been one of the things I associated with her. Diane was already at the kitchen table when Emma came through the door. Emma stopped in the doorway. The pause was brief, a professional's recovery from an unexpected situation, and then she smiled and said, "Diane, I didn't know you were going to be here." Diane said, "Hi, Em." I poured Emma's coffee. I sat across from her. Diane sat to my left. I said, "Emma, I want to ask you about the consulting arrangement." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Which consulting arrangement?" "The one between Hartwell's acquisition subsidiary and Gregory Marsh Consulting LLC, I said. "Greg's company." The quality of Emma's stillness in the moment after I said this told me everything the documents had not quite told me in full. Not guilt exactly. The stillness of a person who has been running a calculation and has just received new information about what the other party knows. She said, "Greg does consulting work in the home improvement retail sector. Hartwell engaging him in his area of expertise isn't." "Emma," I said. "The company was registered 4 months ago. 3 months after you first raised the Hartwell opportunity with me." She looked at me. $336,000, I said. Payable on closing. The kitchen was very quiet. She said, Dad, I can explain the context. Before you do, I said, I want to read you something. I reached into my inside jacket pocket and took out Dorothy's letter. I unfolded it on the table. Emma looked at it. She recognized her mother's handwriting immediately. She had grown up with that handwriting on birthday cards and school notes and the specific correspondence of 41 years of a woman who wrote things down. She went very still. I read the paragraph aloud. Not all of it, the paragraph about the two daughters. I read it quietly, without drama, the way a man reads something written by the woman he loved for 41 years, in the kitchen where that woman had stood every morning. Emma is easy to love. She has always been easy to love. Diane is difficult to love. She has always been difficult to love, in the specific way that people who do not manage you are difficult. The daughter who is difficult is the one who will tell you the truth regardless of what it costs her to tell it. Love her for it. It is the rarest thing available in a family. I finished reading. I folded the letter. I put it back in my pocket. The kitchen was completely silent. Emma was looking at the table. She had been looking at the table since the second sentence. She did not look up. Diane, who had not said a word since Emma sat down, was looking at Emma with the specific expression of someone who has been waiting a very long time for a particular moment and who is not finding it satisfying in the way they had imagined, because the moment is real and real moments involving your sister are not satisfying in any simple sense. Emma said, finally, very quietly, she knew. Yes, I said. She always knew, Emma said. It was not a question. It was a recognition, the specific recognition of a daughter understanding, perhaps for the first time fully, that her mother had seen her completely and had loved her anyway and had also seen exactly what she had done with her father and had left, in a cedar box, the paragraph that described it. She always knew, I said. She tried to tell me for 20 years. Emma looked up at me. Her eyes were full in the way of someone who is not going to cry and who is holding it through the specific effort of someone who has spent their entire life being composed in rooms. She said, I should have told you about Greg's arrangement. Yes, I said. You should have. I convinced myself it was separate, she said. That is work for Hartwell and my recommendation to you. Emma. I said her name the way Dorothy had sometimes said my name, quietly, not unkindly, but with the specific weight of someone who has said the thing once and does not intend to say it again. You know they were not separate. She looked at the table again. Then Diane said, very quietly, He built it for 40 years. Emma looked at her sister. Something passed between them, the specific language of two women who have known each other their entire lives and who communicate in registers that exclude the rest of the world. Then Emma said, to Diane, I know. She said it to Diane. Not to me. And Diane received it, the acknowledgement, the full weight of what it acknowledged, with the specific steadiness of a woman who has been carrying a truth for a long time and who does not need to perform anything now that the truth has been confirmed. I was not going to sign the Hartwell agreement. I told Emma this directly. I told her that Walsh hardware was not for sale. I told her that James Whitfield would be in contact with Hartwell's attorneys that week. I told her that I loved her. I told her that what she had done did not change that. I told her that I did not know what shape the relationship took from here and that I was not going to pretend to know and that the pretending had been part of the problem for long enough. She left at 11. She looked, when she walked out the door, like a person who had arrived at a destination they had not intended and who understood, now, that the way back was a longer road than they had calculated. Diane and I sat at the kitchen table for a while after. Neither of us said much. The kitchen held what it held, the coffee cups, the morning light through Dorothy's window, the letter in my inside pocket against my chest. After a while I said, "She heard Mom's voice." Diane said, "Yes." "In the letter." "She heard her." "Yes," Diane said. "Mom always knew how to reach people. She always did. Even from the cedar box. Even from 2 years gone. She knew exactly how to reach her daughters, and she had left the reaching for the moment it was most needed." James Whitfield was 61 years old and had been practicing business law for 35 years, and when I called him Monday morning with the full picture, he received it the way a professional receives bad news about a family business, without performing shock, because shock is not useful. He said, "All right. Tell me what you want." Emma's failure to disclose Greg's consulting arrangement was a clear breach of fiduciary duty. The 5-month undisclosed letter of intent created additional exposure. The below-market offer combined with the incentive structure that rewarded Emma's husband specifically for a low closing price was what James called a textbook conflict of interest. I asked, "Can you reverse the transaction?" "You haven't signed," he said. "Nothing to reverse. Terminate the Hartwell discussions and decide what to do about Emma's position." He sent the formal termination notice to Hartwell's acquisition team on Wednesday. Hartwell's response noted that Greg's consulting engagement was therefore also terminated and that the termination fee per the consulting agreement was Greg's responsibility. There was a termination fee. Greg had not received the $336,000. Instead, he owed Hartwell $45,000. "James, read me this section over the phone." I sat with it for a moment. Then I said, "What happens to him now?" James said, "He owes a termination fee on a consulting deal that didn't close. That's his problem, not yours." I thought about Greg telling Emma the deal needed to close. About the pressure on Emma from her husband's financial exposure. About everything arranged around getting me to that table with a pen in my hand on a Tuesday evening. About Diane driving 6 hours because Tuesday was too close to wait. The full weight arrived not on the night I found the cedar box or on the morning of the breakfast confrontation or when James terminated the Hartwell agreement, but on a quiet Thursday night 2 weeks later, when all the activity had settled and only the truth remained. I sat in the chair in the living room. The one I had always sat in. The one across from the chair Dorothy had always sat in. 2 chairs that had faced each other across 30 years of evenings. Her chair was empty the way it had been empty for 3 years. I thought about 45 years. 45 years of finding Emma easier and Diane harder. 45 years of calling Emma when I wanted to talk about the business, calling Diane less often because she made things harder. 45 years of Dorothy in that chair across from me, trying in her specific and unhurried way to tell me something I was not quite receiving. The daughter who is difficult is the one who will tell you the truth regardless of what it costs her. It had cost Diane her relationship with her sister, which was cold and might stay cold for a long time. It had cost her 6 hours of driving on a Monday evening when she had a full life and every reason to decide that her father's inability to hear difficult things was his problem and not hers. It had cost her years of being received with less warmth than her honesty deserved, years of being told she was being negative when she was being accurate. She had told me the truth anyway. Every time. For 45 years. I sat with Dorothy's empty chair across from me and felt the full weight of having had something and not knowing I had it until someone drove 6 hours to put it in front of me. I said Dorothy's name out loud, once. Not expecting an answer. The way you say the name of someone who was always right about the things that mattered, when the proof of the rightness has finally arrived, and the only person you want to tell is the one who already knew. She already knew. She already knew. I made the tea she used to make on difficult nights. I drank it at the kitchen table in the specific quiet of a house that has been the site of 40 years of family. I called Diane the next morning. I said, I read Mom's letter again last night. She said, yeah? I said, I want to say something I should have said a long time ago. I had it backwards. I had you backwards and I had Emma backwards and I had it wrong for most of your life and I am sorry. She was quiet. I said, you drove 6 hours on a Monday because Tuesday was too close to wait. And you did it knowing I might do what I've always done, tell you that you were being negative and to work on your relationship with your sister. I thought about that on the drive, she said. I know, I said. And you came anyway. Yes, she said. That's the thing Mom was trying to tell me, I said. For 20 years. That's exactly the thing. She said, after a moment, she was pretty smart. She was the smartest person I ever knew, I said. And the most patient. Walsh Hardware did not sell to Hartwell Home Supply. 7 stores. 3 counties. 43 employees, average tenure now 12 years. Annual revenue of $5.1 million, higher than when Emma was managing director, because Diane has been serving as an outside financial advisor for 8 months, reviewing the accounts monthly on video calls on the first Monday of every month. She does not soften the things that need to be said. She says them directly and I receive them now in the way they were always meant to be received. Emma resigned 3 weeks after the Saturday breakfast. Mutual. We both understood that the managing director position required a trust one was not able to extend. The transition to a professional manager took 6 weeks. Clean. I have seen Emma twice since the resignation, on occasions organized around the grandchildren. The conversations are civil and careful in the way of conversations between people rebuilding something from a damaged foundation. I do not know what that rebuilding eventually produces. Dorothy would have said, let it take the time it takes and be honest while it's taking it. I am trying. Dorothy Walsh left many things, the marriage, the memories, the specific texture of 41 years of shared life. She left the tea in the canister on the counter. She left her chair across from mine. She left the cedar box with the letter that said the thing she had been trying to say for 20 years. She left it in writing because she knew me. She knew I was the kind of man who responds to a document, who finds clarity in the written thing in a way that spoken conversation sometimes does not produce. She had been trying to tell me with conversation for 20 years. She wrote it down. She also left the business. Not to either daughter but to me, with the understanding that I would manage the transfer carefully when the time was right. What I found in the cedar box was not just the letter. It was 20 years of patience. The specific love of a woman who understood that some truths take longer than they should and that the loving response is to keep making the truth available rather than giving up on its eventual arrival. She did not give up. She wrote it down. And the difficult daughter drove 6 hours on a Monday evening. And the father finally, fully understood. The daughter who tells you the truth regardless of what it costs her is the rarest thing available in a family. Love her for it. Dorothy said so. She was right. She was always right. The first Walsh hardware store opened on a Tuesday in March of 1987, and I want to tell you about that day because it is relevant to understanding what was almost lost and what was preserved. Dorothy and I had driven to the space the evening before to do the final setup, product on the shelves, the register calibrated, the back room organized with the specific efficiency of 2 people who had been planning this for 2 years and who understood exactly where everything needed to go. We had worked until 11 at night and then driven home and slept briefly and arrived at 7 the next morning to open at 8. The first customer was a man named Gerald who lived 4 blocks away and who needed a specific size of hex bolt that the big box store across the city did not stock in that size. I had that size. Gerald left with his hex bolts and a receipt and a handshake, and he came back the following Tuesday for something else, and the Tuesday after that for something else, and Gerald shopped at Walsh Hardware for 31 years until he moved into assisted living in 2018. He was our first customer. He was also, in the way of first customers who become loyal regulars, the proof of the business model, that the gap between what people needed and what the national chains stocked was a gap worth filling, and that filling it with knowledge and consistency and the specific reliability of a locally owned business that remembered what you needed would produce exactly the loyalty that made the business sustainable. Gerald is the reason I could not sign those papers. Not Gerald specifically. Gerald is not a symbolic figure in a story. He is a real man who needed hex bolts in 2018 and also needed someone to give him 15 minutes of genuine attention about a plumbing project he was attempting, and he was given those 15 minutes because Walsh Hardware was the kind of store that gave 15 minutes to people who needed it. The 43 employees who have been with us an average of 12 years are the reason I could not sign those papers. Not any individual one of them, all of them, the aggregate of their combined tenure and their specific knowledge of what their customers needed and their presence in the communities the stores served. Hartwell's acquisition model preserved local branding and local staff. Emma had said this. She had said it accurately. Hartwell did maintain the local brand and staff in their acquisitions. What Hartwell's model did not preserve was the specific quality of ownership that produced the 12-year average tenure in the Gerald story and the 15 minutes for the plumbing project. That quality is not in the brand or the staff alone. It is in the ownership structure that produces it, the accountability of a person whose name is on the sign and whose 40 years of commitment is the thing the staff and customers respond to. Hartwell would have maintained Walsh Hardware's name. I could not have maintained what the name meant without maintaining the ownership. Emma knew this. Dorothy had always known this. I understood it on the Thursday night in the living room, sitting with Dorothy's empty chair. Walsh Hardware needed to stay Walsh Hardware. Dorothy had built it alongside me with the specific understanding that it was the kind of thing worth protecting at the cost of the difficulty protection required. Diane protected it. At the cost of the difficulty it required. That is the whole of it. Dorothy assessed people the way she assessed everything, directly, without the comfortable softening that makes assessment easier to deliver and less useful when delivered. She had been doing this for 69 years when she died, and she was, in my experience of her across 41 of those years, correct in her assessments with the consistency of someone whose method is sound. She had assessed Emma correctly. Emma was warm. Emma was competent. Emma managed relationships with skill. These assessments were accurate. Dorothy had also assessed the specific quality of that management, the way the warmth and the management coexisted in ways that made them difficult to distinguish, and had tried for 20 years to make me see the distinction. She had assessed Diane correctly. Diane was difficult. Diane was honest in the non-negotiable way that produces difficulty. These assessments were also accurate. Dorothy had also assessed the value of the non-negotiable honesty, the way it made Diane the person you needed when what was needed was the truth at whatever cost, and had tried for 20 years to make me receive the value. I had received the descriptions without receiving the assessments. Dorothy's assessments were available to me for 20 years, and I had treated them as the protective bias of a mother toward the more challenging child rather than as the accurate reading of a woman who was the best assessor of people I have ever known. This is the specific mistake I made. Not trusting Emma too much. Trusting Emma is not a mistake in itself. Trust based on 15 years of consistent performance is reasonable. The mistake was not trusting Dorothy's assessment alongside the trust. Not applying her reading of the distinction to the way I received each daughter's input. not understanding that the daughter who managed me was managing me and the daughter who didn't was the one I needed when the management needed to stop. Dorothy had been offering me the correction for 20 years. I had been receiving it as sentiment rather than as information. She was never sentimental. Everything she said was information. I know this now. I will carry it going forward. The first Monday meeting with Diane as financial advisor was 37 days after the Thursday night in the living room. She called in at 10 o'clock from her office 6 hours away, and we spent 2 hours going through the accounts with the specific methodical attention she brought to everything she did in her professional life. She had reviewed the previous 6 months of financials before the call, and she had questions, precise, specific, the questions of someone who had identified the places where the numbers needed clarification and who was not going to move past those places without the clarification. I answered the questions. Some of the answers required me to look things up in real time and ask our new operations manager to pull specific reports. Diane waited. She did not fill the waiting with conversation. She waited with the specific patience of someone who has learned that waiting is more useful than talking when the thing you're waiting for is information. 2 hours later, she said, "I have 3 recommendations." She gave them. Directly. Without softening. Each one identified something that needed to change and said what it needed to change to and why the change was warranted. 2 of the 3 recommendations were things I would have resisted if Emma had made them, because Emma would have packaged them in the warmth that made them easy to receive, and the ease of reception would have made me less likely to actually implement them. Diane made them without packaging, and I received them as what they were, which was accurate assessments of what needed to change. I implemented all 3 within 2 weeks. The accounts looked better at the second Monday meeting. Diane noted this without celebration. She said, "Good. Now let's look at the supplier contracts." She was right about the supplier contracts too. This is what accurate assessment produces, when you are finally ready to receive it. Not warmth. Not comfort. Better decisions. Dorothy had been trying to give me access to this for 20 years. She had been trying to give me Diane, the real Diane, the Diane whose difficulty was entirely the difficulty of a person who tells you what is true rather than what is comfortable, for 20 years. I have it now. I will not give it up. There are 4 grandchildren. 2 are Emma's, 2 are Diane's. They range in age from 8 to 15. Emma's children have their mother's social ease. They move through rooms with the comfortable warmth of children who have been raised by someone who makes warmth the primary register of family life. They are lovely children. They call me Grandpa Walsh, and they know the stores by name, and they have been brought to Walsh Hardware on Saturday mornings enough times to know where the hex bolts are. Diane's children have their mother's directness. The 15-year-old, a girl named Frances, told me during a holiday visit that she thought the Hartwell deal sounded wrong when she heard about it at the dinner table. I said, "Did you?" "Why?" She said, "Because Mom got quiet." She gets quiet when something is wrong. She doesn't get upset, she gets quiet. And she was very quiet during that whole period. I looked at my granddaughter, 15 years old, her mother's eyes, her grandmother's assessor quality already operating clearly and accurately. I said, "You were right." She said, "I know. I just didn't have the documents." I laughed. The first real laugh I had produced in several weeks. Frances looked at me with the expression of someone who finds it mildly amusing that an adult has found something funny in a thing that seemed to her simply accurate. That is Frances. That is Diane's daughter. Dorothy would have loved her without reservation. Walsh Hardware is, at this writing, in the second year of its post-Hartwell period, which is what I call the 18 months since Diane walked through the door and I put the pen down. 7 stores. 43 employees, with 2 additions this year, a third in planning. Annual revenue growing for the first time in 4 years, not through the acquisition of new capabilities but through the specific attention that Diane's monthly reviews have directed at inefficiencies that had accumulated during the period when the focus was on the sale rather than the business. The new managing director is a woman named Sandra Park who has been in hardware retail for 20 years and who does not know me well enough yet to manage my feelings about the business, which means she tells me the truth about it with the specific directness of someone who has nothing invested in my comfort and everything invested in the outcome. I like her for exactly this reason. I hired her, in part, because Diane recommended her. Diane had worked with Sandra at a previous company and had said, in the specific way Diane says things, she will tell you what's wrong before it costs you anything, and she will do it without making you feel bad about the fact that something is wrong. She is the right person. She was right. Sandra is the right person. I trust Diane's assessments now in the way I should have trusted them for 45 years. Not because the assessments are always comfortable, they are not, but because they have been consistently accurate and because accurate assessments, received honestly, produce better outcomes than comfortable assessments that protect feelings at the expense of truth. Dorothy knew this. She tried to give it to me for 20 years. I have it now. I am not wasting it. I call Diane every Sunday evening. Not instead of calling Emma, I call Emma on Tuesdays, which is the call schedule we have maintained since the resignation, which we both understand is the way of keeping a damaged relationship from dying entirely while it is rebuilding. The Sunday calls with Diane are different from the Tuesday calls with Emma in exactly the way you would expect, if you have followed this story, in exactly the way Dorothy would have predicted. The Tuesday calls with Emma are warm and careful and cover the grandchildren and the weather and the holidays and the occasional careful peripheral reference to the business that both of us understand is not yet the territory for full honesty. They are the calls of two people who love each other and who damaged something between them and who are rebuilding it from the warmth up. The Sunday calls with Diane cover everything. The business, the grandchildren, the things I am thinking about, the things she is thinking about, the occasional direct challenge to something I have said or done that week that she thinks needs to be reconsidered. She delivers the challenge and I receive it and we continue. Last Sunday she said, "Have you called Mom's sister this month?" I said, "Not this month." She said, "Call her. She's getting older and she doesn't hear from you enough and it would matter to her." I called Dorothy's sister on Monday morning. We talked for 45 minutes. She told me things about Dorothy I had not known, specific stories from before I had known her, the texture of Dorothy's early life that the years had made available to be told. If I had not called Diane last Sunday, I would not have called Dorothy's sister on Monday morning. If I had not received what Diane said as information rather than as criticism, I would have told myself I would call Dorothy's sister eventually and would not have called her for another month. Diane made me call. I am grateful she made me call. I was going to say this is what the Sunday calls produce. But that is not quite right. What the Sunday calls produce is a relationship in which I receive difficult true things and act on them. That is what Dorothy was trying to give me for 20 years. A relationship with a daughter who tells the truth and a father who receives it. I have it now. Every Sunday. It is the most useful thing available to me. This is the accounting of what remains, 14 months after the Tuesday evening in December when Diane came through the door. Walsh Hardware, 7 stores, 43 employees plus 2, annual revenue growing. First Monday of every month with Diane on the phone reviewing the accounts with the specific honest attention that the accounts require and that they were not receiving for the 18 months when the focus was on the sale. The cedar box, open, its contents read, the letter in the drawer of my desk where I keep the things that have permanently changed my understanding of something. I look at it sometimes. Not often enough. Dorothy's letter, read so many times I could reproduce it from memory, and I do sometimes reproduce it in my memory on Sunday evenings when I am about to call Diane and when I want to receive the call in the way it deserves to be received. The daughter who tells you the truth regardless of what it costs her. the rarest thing available in a family. The 2 chairs in the living room, Dorothy's empty across from mine. I sit in mine on Thursday evenings, which was the evening Diane first came with the folder, and I think about what the living room has held and what it holds now. Diane, on the phone on Sunday evenings and on video calls on the first Monday of every month, and present in the specific way of someone who has been present for 42 years and who I have been receiving more fully for 14 months. I am still learning to receive her correctly. I am better at it than I was. I expect to keep getting better. The difficult daughter is still difficult. She told me last month that I was avoiding a decision about the Riverside store lease renewal and that the avoidance was going to cost me leverage with the landlord. She was right. I made the decision. The leverage was preserved. She was right. Dorothy said she would be. Dorothy was right about everything. The steady father knows this now. He will always know it. Going forward. Carrying what she left. The difficult daughter drove 6 hours. The father put the pen down. The cedar box was opened. The letter was read. Walsh Hardware is still Walsh Hardware. Dorothy was right. That is everything. That is the steady father. I want to tell you what 40 years of building a business looks like, because most people have not built one, and because without understanding what was at stake I cannot make you feel what almost happened. It does not look like a single dramatic decision. It looks like Tuesday mornings when the supplier calls at 7 and there is a problem with the delivery and you solve the problem before the store opens. It looks like the Saturday in 2003 when the Riverside store's roof developed a leak at noon during a sale and everyone on staff stayed until 10 at night helping customers and managing inventory and running buckets, and not one of them complained because that was the culture, and the culture came from the fact that the owner was there too, also running buckets. It looks like the decision in 2008, when the financial crisis reduced discretionary spending and the sensible business move was to cut staff, and instead I reduced my own salary for 18 months because the people who had been with me for 7 years had mortgages and children and had built their working lives around Walsh Hardware, and because cutting them was not something I was willing to do. It looks like Gerald coming in for hex bolts in 1987 and coming back every Tuesday for 31 years. 40 years of that. 40 years of Tuesday mornings and Saturday roof leaks and reduced salaries and specific reliable service to people who needed it, accumulated into 7 stores and 43 employees and $4.2 million of independent value. Emma had been prepared to deliver this to Hartwell for $2,900,000, with $336,000 of the buyer's money going to her husband. Diane had driven 6 hours on a Monday evening because Tuesday was too close to wait. I think about these two facts together, often, because they are the facts that most completely describe the 2 daughters and the 45 years I had them backwards. Emma loved the business. I believe this. She loved it, and she also made a decision about the business that she should not have made. And the decision was shaped by her husband's financial interest and by the specific quality of her relationship with Smooth Water. She wanted the smoothness that the Hartwell deal represented, the certainty, the clean exit from the complexity of managing 7 stores in a shifting market. She wanted the smoothness badly enough to manage me toward it. Diane loved the business because she loved me and because what I had built was part of what I was. She loved it with the specific unsentimental love of someone who does not manage you and therefore loves the actual thing rather than the managed version of the thing. She saw the stores for what they were, 40 years of specific commitment to specific people in specific communities, and she drove 6 hours because that was worth the drive. Dorothy saw both of these things clearly for their entire lives. I see them now. That is what the cedar box contained. Not just the letter, the permission to see what Dorothy had been trying to show me, in the form she had known would reach me. She was right. The form reached me. After I opened the cedar box, I found, deeper in it, below the photographs and the cards, a small bundle of letters that were not addressed to anyone. They were letters she had written to herself. Not a diary, specific letters, addressed Dear Dee in a handwriting I recognized as her writing to herself in a more private register than the organized precision of her ordinary correspondence. 12 letters. Spanning 12 years. Each one working through something she was thinking about in the way that Dorothy worked through things, methodically, without sentiment, arriving at accurate conclusions through the application of honest attention. 4 of the 12 letters were about the girls. The first was from 2009, when Emma had been working at Walsh Hardware for 2 years. It said, "Emma is excellent at this. She is genuinely excellent. The staff respond to her and the customers respond to her and the numbers are moving in the right direction. I am watching something that I also watched when she was 12 years old and 15 years old and 22 years old, which is the specific quality of her attention to the room she is in. She always knows what the room needs from her and she provides it. The question I am sitting with is what happens when what the room needs and what Emma needs diverge. I have not seen that happen yet. I hope not to see it. But I am watching." She had been watching in 2009. The second was from 2014. It said, "I have been thinking about the difference between warmth and management, and whether there is a point at which they become indistinguishable from the outside and what happens when they become indistinguishable from the inside. Emma's warmth is real. I have never doubted this. I am beginning to wonder, watching her with Henry, whether she knows the difference herself, or whether the management has become so complete that it no longer feels like management to her but simply like the way she moves through the world. I do not know what to do with this observation. I am writing it down because writing it down is what I do when I do not know what to do with something." The third was from 2017. It said, "I spoke to Diane today. She told me something about the Riverside store accounts that she had noticed and that she said she was not going to bring to Henry because the last time she brought something to Henry about Emma's management he told her she was being negative. She was not being negative. She was being accurate. I told her I would look into it. She said, 'Mom, you always believe me.' She said it with the specific sadness of someone who is not used to being believed. My daughter is not used to being believed by her family. This is not a neutral fact. I had not known about this conversation. I had not known that Diane had brought something to Dorothy in 2017 because she could not bring it to me. I had not known that Dorothy had served as the intermediary, the person who received Diane's honest assessment and translated it into a form the rest of the family could receive. Dorothy had been doing this. Quietly. 4 years. The fourth letter was from 2020, the year before she died. It said, "I have been thinking about what happens when I am gone. Henry will trust Emma, which is reasonable. Emma will manage Henry, which she will believe is for his benefit, which may even be true. Diane will tell Henry things that Henry will find difficult, which Henry will find easier to attribute to Diane's difficulty than to the accuracy of what she is saying. I need to find a way to give Henry permission to hear Diane before this becomes a problem. I am going to write a letter. I am going to put it in the cedar box. I am going to hope that Henry reads it when he needs it." She had planned the letter. She had known, in 2020, that the letter would be needed, and she had known why, and she had written it. She had planned for this from a year before she died. I sat with the 4 letters for a long time. Then I put them back in the cedar box, in the drawer of my desk, where they will remain. They are the full picture of what she saw and what she tried to do with what she saw. She saw everything. She always saw everything. I want to come back to the line from Dorothy's letter that I have returned to most often, because it is the line that contains the whole of what she was trying to tell me and what I am trying to carry forward. The daughter who tells you the truth regardless of what it costs her is the rarest thing available in a family. I have been thinking about the word rarest. Not rare, rarest. The superlative. Dorothy was a careful writer. She did not use superlatives casually. The rarest thing. Not among valuable things, among available things. Among all the things a family can offer you, she is saying, the person who tells you the truth at personal cost is the one in shortest supply. Why is it rare? Because telling the truth at personal cost requires the specific willingness to prioritize the recipient's accurate understanding over the relationship's immediate comfort, and most people, most of the time, prioritize the comfort. Not because they are dishonest. Because they are human, and because the short-term cost of difficult truth is always visible and the long-term cost of comfortable untruth is always invisible until the moment it becomes catastrophic. Emma prioritized the comfort. Not maliciously, she prioritized it the way people prioritize it, from the accumulated habit of a lifetime in which prioritizing it had produced good outcomes and not prioritizing it had produced conflict. She had learned, somewhere in her childhood or her adulthood or both, that the smooth version was better than the true version when the true version created friction, and she had applied this learning until the moment it crossed the line from management into fraud. Diane prioritized the truth. Not heroically, she prioritized it the way people prioritize things that are simply not available to them in any other form. She cannot produce the comfortable version. She has never been able to. She told me things for 45 years that I found difficult and that were accurate and that I would have benefited from receiving more completely, and she kept telling me because not telling me was not an option she could access. She drove 6 hours on a Monday because the truth required 6 hours of driving, and the truth is what she does. The rarest thing available in a family. I have it. I always had it. I am receiving it now with the full attention it has always deserved. Dorothy was right to call it rare. She was right about everything. The steady father receives it now. He will always receive it now. That is the steady father. That is everything. That is the end. She left a letter in a cedar box. She knew the form that he could finally read. The easy daughter managed the smooth water. The difficult one told him what he'd need. 6 hours in the dark on a Monday because Tuesday morning was too close. She put the folder on the kitchen table and the 40 years were saved from what it cost. Dad. Don't sign anything. 4 words. He put the pen down. He listened. He opened the cedar box. He read the letter. He finally, fully understood. Dorothy was right about everything. She always was. The steady father knows it now. He'll always know it. That is enough. That is everything. That is the steady father. Frank Caruso came to my house 2 weeks after the Hartwell termination, not for a scheduled meeting but because he wanted to say something in person that he felt he should have said during the transaction review process and that he had not said because he had not been asked. He sat at the kitchen table and he said, "I should have called you when Emma asked me to sign off on the independent valuation without discussing the offer with me." I said, "You were asked to sign off on a valuation, not on the transaction." He said, "Yes. But I've been your financial advisor for 12 years and I should have understood that a valuation being conducted in the context of a transaction was something I needed to have a view on." Emma presented the valuation process to me as a standalone exercise. I accepted that framing. I should not have. This is the specific accountability of a professional who understands that the error was not in what he did but in what he did not notice. He was not asked to review the transaction. He accepted the framing that he was not needed for the transaction. He should not have accepted that framing. I said, "Frank, You were given incomplete information and you worked with what you had. That's what happened. He said, yes. And I'm telling you that if you had shown me the transaction structure before the decision was made, I would have flagged the consulting fee and the earn-out terms and the liability provisions immediately. These were not subtle problems. They were apparent problems that were apparent precisely because they had been structured to benefit the buyer rather than the seller. I thought about this. Would you have known about Greg's company? I said. He said, no. That was not information I had access to. But the transaction structure itself, the earn-out, the liabilities, the price, those were things I could have identified as problematic before you were at a table with a pen. He left after an hour. He left with the specific subdued quality of a professional who has acknowledged a failure of attention and who is deciding what he will do differently going forward. He has done one thing differently, which he told me about at our next quarterly review. He told me that he had implemented a new protocol in his practice. When a client is presented with a transaction involving a family member, he now requires a meeting with the client independent of the family member to review the transaction before any documents are executed. This protocol would have caught what happened. He implemented it because of what happened. I find this meaningful. Not redemptive, the protocol could not undo what had been done. But meaningful in the way that learning produces something lasting from the cost of what it took to learn. He is still my financial advisor. Some people, when given the opportunity to demonstrate the lesson they claim to have learned, demonstrate it. Frank is one of them. 6 weeks after the Hartwell termination, I held a meeting with all Walsh hardware managers, the store managers, the operations team, the buyer. 9 people. I told them what had happened. Not in exhaustive detail. In the specific honest summary of a man who believes his employees deserve to know the truth about the business they have committed to. I told them a sale had been under negotiation that I had decided not to proceed with. I told them Walsh Hardware was not for sale. I told them the growth plan that Diane and Sandra Park had developed in the preceding weeks, which included the 2 new hires that had already been made and the 3rd that was in planning. Then I said, I want to tell you something that is not a business update. It's personal. Walsh Hardware is 40 years old this year. I built it with my wife. We built it with the specific belief that the gap between what people needed and what the national chains provided was a gap worth filling with knowledge and reliability and the kind of service that only a locally owned business can sustain. That belief has not changed. The stores have not changed. The commitment has not changed. What changed is that I almost let someone else make a decision about this business that was not theirs to make. I caught it in time. And I want you to know that the reason I caught it is that someone who cared about this business cared enough to drive 6 hours to make sure I heard what I needed to hear. The room was quiet. Then Gerald Park, who had been the Riverside store manager for 14 years and who had worked at Walsh Hardware for 19, said, "Was it Diane?" I said, "Yes." He nodded. "She came into the store in November," he said. "She walked the whole store and she talked to people. She asked good questions." He paused. "She seemed like she was paying attention." "She was," I said. "She always is." Gerald nodded again. Then he said, "Good." That was the employee meeting. One word from Gerald Park, who had been with us for 19 years, after I told him what had happened. Good. That is the whole of what the 40 years had produced and what had almost been lost and what was preserved. Good. Dorothy would have appreciated the economy of it. She had always appreciated economy, the precise thing, no more, no less. Good. Sandra Park became Walsh Hardware's managing director 6 weeks after Emma's resignation, and I want to tell you about her because she is part of the what comes next that this story requires. She was 51 years old and she had been in hardware retail for 22 years, starting at a national chain and transitioning to independent retail 15 years ago when she had decided that the national chain model was not the work she wanted to be doing. She had managed 2 independent hardware operations before Walsh Hardware, both of which had grown during her tenure, and she had been recommended by Diane, who had worked with her in a previous context and whose recommendation I received with the full weight that Diane's recommendations now carry. The first time I disagreed with something Sandra said, she did not adjust her position to accommodate the disagreement. She heard me, she restated her position with additional specificity about why she held it, and she waited for me to respond to the substance rather than to the fact of her disagreement. This is not what you get from someone who is managing you. This is what you get from someone who is trying to get the decision right. I responded to the substance. We found the better position, which was neither mine nor hers but emerged from the specific pressure of honest disagreement between 2 people who both wanted the right outcome. I hire for this now. I look for it specifically in every personnel decision. The person who adjusts their position when you push back is giving you smooth water. The person who holds their position and responds to the substance is giving you something more useful. Dorothy knew this. She would have liked Sandra Park. Walsh Hardware will outlast me. I have accepted this as a planning reality rather than a philosophical preference, because the 43 people whose livelihoods depend on these stores deserve the security of a transition plan, and a transition plan that depends on my continued presence is not a transition plan. Diane and I have talked about this. Not once, 3 times. In the direct way that she and I now talk about things, with the specificity that comes from 2 people who have agreed to be honest with each other about what is real. The transition plan does not involve selling to Hartwell. It does not involve selling to any national chain. It involves, over the next 5 to 8 years, the development of an ownership structure that preserves the values and the operational independence that make Walsh Hardware what it is. The details of this structure are still being worked out. Diane is involved in working them out. Sandra Park is involved. Frank Caruso is involved. James Whitfield is involved. Emma is not involved, which is a truth I carry with the specific weight of truths that are both accurate and painful. She was the managing director for 8 years. She had genuine contributions to the business that are embedded in its current structure. And she made a decision that removed her from the conversation about its future. I do not know if this is permanent. I hope it is not. Dorothy would have said, let it take the time it takes and be honest while it's taking it. I am trying to take the time it takes. I am being honest while it's taking it. That is the steady thing. That is what remains. Walsh Hardware is still Walsh Hardware. The difficult daughter reviews the accounts on the first Monday of every month. The father listens. He always listens now. Dorothy was right about everything. He finally knows it. And he is carrying it forward, the tea in the canister, the cedar box in the drawer, the Sunday calls, the first Monday meetings, the stores that are still the stores, the 40 years that almost became someone else's and that are still, finally, entirely, his. Going forward. Carrying what she left. The rarest thing available in a family is the person who tells you the truth regardless of what it costs them. He has her. He always had her. He knows it now. That is everything. That is the steady father. Over 41 years of marriage, Dorothy said things that I heard at the time and received incompletely, the way you receive things when you are not yet ready for the full weight of what is being offered. There are 5 things she said repeatedly, in various forms, that I have been receiving more completely since opening the cedar box. The first, build the thing that lasts. not the thing that looks like it lasts. She said this about the business in 1993, when I was tempted by a branding refresh that would have made the stores look more national and less local. She said it about the business, and she also said it about everything else, about relationships, about decisions, about the specific difference between the appearance of solidity and the actual foundation. The Hartwell deal looked like a lasting solution. $2,900,000 in a clean transaction with a national chain. It was the appearance of lasting. The actual foundation, 43 employees, 12-year average tenure, specific community relationships, was what was actually lasting, and it required staying rather than selling to preserve it. The second, the comfortable decision and the right decision are different decisions. This is the one I have thought about most in relation to Emma. Emma's comfortable decision was to recommend the deal that her husband would benefit from, and that would resolve the complexity of managing 7 stores by handing it to someone else. The right decision was to tell me about the consulting fee and let me make an informed choice. She made the comfortable decision. Dorothy had been trying to tell me for 20 years that the comfortable decision is always available and always tempting and rarely right. The third, watch what people do when it costs them something. She said this about employees in the context of hiring, and she said it about family members, and she said it about me on occasions when my decisions had been shaped more by comfort than by what the situation actually required. What Diane did when it cost her something was drive 6 hours and put a folder on the kitchen table and say 4 words. What Emma did when it cost her something was recommend a transaction that served her husband's interests at a discount to mine. These are the actions. They are the information. Dorothy had been telling me to watch the actions for 41 years. The fourth, the person who never challenges you doesn't love you enough. She said this specifically in the context of the 2 daughters, though not in those terms. She said it in the context of the distinction between the relationships that made you feel good and the relationships that made you better, and she said it was possible to have both in one relationship, but that you should be suspicious when a relationship only ever made you feel good without ever making you better. She applied this to Emma in conversations I received as being about something else. She was trying to tell me about the 2 daughters. I was receiving it as general wisdom about relationships. The fifth, the cedar box is in the back of the closet. She said this to me 2 months before she died, on a morning when she was having a clear day and we were sitting in the kitchen with our coffee, and she was looking at me in the specific way she looked at me when she was about to say something she had been preparing. She said, "There is a cedar box in the back of the closet. I want you to open it when you need it." I said, "What do you mean, when I need it?" She said, "You'll know." I said, "Okay." She said, "Don't open it before then. Wait until you need it." I said, "Okay." She said, "Henry, I need you to promise." I promised. I kept the promise. I waited until I needed it. She knew I would wait. She knew the promise would hold because promises held with me, which was something she understood about me that was worth understanding. She knew me. She always knew me. And she left what she left in the form I could receive. That is everything. On Tuesday mornings I go to one of the stores. Not always the same one, I rotate, visiting each store approximately once every 7 weeks, arriving before opening and staying for 2 or 3 hours. I am not the managing director. I do not make operational decisions on these visits. I walk the store, I talk to the staff, I answer questions from customers who recognize me. Gerald, the man who needed hex bolts in 1987 and came back every Tuesday for 31 years, was not available for his last few years because his health had declined, and then he moved to assisted living. He passed away last spring. I went to his service. But there are other Geralds. There are always other Geralds. Last Tuesday at the Riverside store a woman came in needing help with a bathroom tile project. She had started the project herself, which was ambitious, and she had run into a specific problem with the substrate that was outside her previous experience. I spent 25 minutes with her, not because I was the only person available but because the conversation was happening and I was in it, and I know about bathroom tile substrate from 37 years of people asking me about bathroom tile substrate. She left with what she needed. She said, "Thank you. The big box store told me I needed to hire someone." I said, "You can do this yourself. You just needed the right information." She said, "That's why I come here. That is Walsh hardware. That is what was almost sold for $2,900,000. The right information. For the person who needs it. In the specific way that only a locally owned business sustained by 40 years of commitment can provide it." Dorothy understood this. It was the whole of why she co-signed the loan in 1986. I am protecting it on Tuesday mornings. I will keep protecting it for as long as I am able. 1 year after Diane walked through the door, the accounting is this. Walsh Hardware, 7 stores, 45 employees now, annual revenue up 11% from the prior year. Sandra Park managing with the specific honest directness that Diane had promised, and that has proven out across 12 months of decisions. Diane, on the phone every Sunday evening, on the video call every first Monday, present in the specific way of someone who has always been present and who I am finally receiving as present. She told me last month that Frances wants to work at the stores over the summer. I said yes immediately. Diane said, "She'll be direct with people." I said, "Good. That's exactly what we need." Emma, on the phone on Tuesdays, the conversations warming slowly in the way that damaged relationships warm when both parties are honest about what they want from the rebuilding. She said something at Christmas that I am still thinking about. She said, "Dad, I know what I did. I'm not trying to minimize it. I'm trying to figure out who I am on the other side of it." I said, "That's the right question." She said, "Mom would have known the answer before I had to ask it." I said, "She usually did." Dorothy, in the cedar box in the drawer. In the tea in the canister. In the chair across from mine in the living room. In the letter that said the things she had been trying to say for 20 years and that reached me in the form she had known would reach me. In Diane, who has her directness and her willingness to tell the truth at personal cost and her specific inability to soften the truth to manage someone else's feelings. Dorothy did not die and leave nothing behind. She left Diane, and she left the letter that taught me to receive Diane correctly, and she left the cedar box that she knew I would open when I needed it and not before. That is what remains. That is what she left. Going forward. Carrying what she left. The difficult daughter drove 6 hours. The father put the pen down. Walsh Hardware is still Walsh Hardware. Dorothy was right. She was always right. The steady father knows it. He will always know it. That is everything. That is the steady father. The end. She wrote the letter when she knew the time was near. She put it where he'd find it when he needed it. She knew the form that he could finally hear, the written word, the document, the reading of it. She spent 40 years beside him learning how, and in the last she used that knowledge perfectly. The difficult daughter tells you what is true. The easy one manages the room and the feeling. Dorothy knew the difference all the way through and tried to give him both with equal seeing. He has them both now, each one as she is, the easy daughter healing and the true one calling every Sunday. The cedar box is open. The letter has been read. Dorothy was right about all of it. She always was, and the steady father knows it and is going forward carrying what she left, which is the rarest thing available in a family, the daughter who tells you the truth regardless of what it costs her. He has her. He always had her. He knows it now. That is the steady thing. That is everything. That is the steady father. That is the end. Among the things I learned in the months after opening the cedar box was that Dorothy had been having conversations I did not know she was having, specific, deliberate conversations with Diane and with people who knew our family, in which she was doing the work of preparation that she could not do openly without revealing what she was preparing for. She had called Diane 3 months before she died. Not one of their regular calls, a specific call, initiated by Dorothy, during which she had said something that Diane told me about only when I asked her directly if there was anything about those final months she had not shared with me. Diane said, she called me in February. She said she wanted to talk to me about Dad. I said, what did she say? Diane said, she said, Diane, your father is going to need you after I'm gone. Not in the immediate way, in the way that will matter more. He is going to need you to tell him things that you may not feel welcome to tell him, and I want you to tell them anyway. I want you to promise me. I sat with this for a moment. Did you promise? She said, yes. And then Hartwell happened, I said. Yes, she said. And I thought about that promise a lot during the drive. I thought, this is the thing she was talking about. This is exactly the thing. Dorothy had called Diane in February. She had asked her to promise. She had known, from wherever her understanding of our family came from 41 years of watching the 2 daughters and watching me receive them, that the test of the promise was going to come. She had prepared Diane for the test. The way she had prepared me with the letter. She had made sure we were both ready. Diane had kept the promise. 6 hours on a Monday evening because Tuesday was too close to wait. I have thought about Dorothy making that call in February, in the last months of her life, in the specific window between knowing the end was coming and the end itself arriving, and choosing to use that window to prepare Diane for the specific thing she could see coming. Not the Hartwell deal specifically. She could not have seen that. But the general shape of it, a situation in which what Diane had to say would be unwelcome and necessary and in which Diane would need permission and encouragement to say it anyway. She saw the shape. She prepared for it. She made Diane promise. That is Dorothy. That is everything Dorothy was. She spent the last months of her life making sure the right things would happen after she was gone, by the specific, loving, practical act of talking to the right people and asking them to do the right things. She made me promise to open the cedar box only when I needed it. She made Diane promise to tell me the things I needed to hear. She arranged, from the end of her own life, the pieces of what happened the following December. Not exactly. Not in detail. But in shape. She arranged the shape of it, and we filled in the specific details ourselves, and the outcome was what she had been trying to produce for 20 years. She was right. She was always right. The steady father knows the full scope of her rightness now. He is still discovering dimensions of it. He expects to keep discovering dimensions of it for whatever time remains. Every morning I made coffee in the kitchen where Dorothy made coffee for 41 years. I make it the way she made it, the same brand, the same strength, the same cup, the same chair at the kitchen table where the morning light comes through the window that was there when we bought the house in 1991. The routine of the morning is the most complete remaining version of the daily life we built together. Not a memorial to it, a continuation of it, in the specific form that continuation takes when one person in the pair is no longer there and the other is finding out what the continuation looks like as a solo exercise. It looks like this: the coffee, the chair, the window, the quiet of the early morning before the phone begins. Sometimes I read. Sometimes I simply sit. Sometimes I look at the photograph on the counter, Dorothy in the first store, 1987, the week we opened, standing in front of a shelf of products that was going to be full of the specific items that people in this neighborhood needed and that the big box store did not stock, laughing at something I had said about the hex bolts. She was laughing at something. I no longer remember what. She looks like a person who is exactly where she is supposed to be, doing exactly what she is supposed to be doing, with the specific rightness of someone whose assessment of the situation has been proven accurate and who is enjoying the proof. She was right about the stores. She was right about the daughters. She was right about the cedar box. She was right about everything. The morning continues. The coffee gets finished. The day begins, the stores, the accounts, the calls, the first Monday meeting with Diane, the Tuesday call with Emma, the Sunday evening that ends with the call to Diane that has become the most important call of my week. The steady father goes forward. He carries what she left. That is enough. That is everything. Let me tell you what Walsh Hardware would have become if I had signed those papers. Hartwell Home Supply is a publicly traded company with 47 locations across the region. Their acquisition model preserves local brand names and local staff for a period of 18 to 36 months after acquisition, after which the locations are typically rebranded under the Hartwell name and integrated into the Hartwell operational system. The local brand would have lasted 2 years. Maybe 3. The local staff would have remained, initially, but the specific decisions about staffing levels, product mix, supplier relationships, and service standards would have moved to Hartwell's Regional Operations Center, which makes those decisions for 47 locations simultaneously using data-driven models that optimize across the network rather than for the specific community each location serves. Gerald's hex bolts might still be in stock. The specific knowledge of why Gerald needed that size, held by the staff member who had known Gerald for 11 years, would not have been in stock. The knowledge would not have been valued by the system that replaced it because the system would have no mechanism for valuing what cannot be quantified across 47 locations. The 43 employees, average tenure 12 years, would have retained their jobs initially. Whether they would have retained them through the integration period, and whether the jobs they retained would have been the jobs they valued, is a different question. The $336,000 would have gone to Greg. The $2,900,000 would have come to me, which is $1,300,000 less than the independent valuation and a number I would have spent the rest of my life knowing was not what the stores were worth. That is what almost happened. That is what Diane's 6-hour drive prevented. Dorothy left Diane the specific quality of honesty that made that drive possible. She left me the letter that made me able to receive what Diane had to say. She left us both in the form she had been able to leave us, imperfect, late, at significant cost, but there. She left enough. Dorothy always left enough. The steady father knows it now. He is going forward with it. That is the steady father. That is everything. The end. The coffee is the same brand. The chair is the same chair. The photograph is on the counter. Dorothy in 1987 laughing at something. The first store. The first Tuesday of its operation. Gerald would come the following week. He would come for 31 years. The difficult daughter drives 6 hours when she has to. She promised Dorothy she would. She kept the promise. He has the stores. He has the Sunday calls. He has the first Monday meetings. He has the cedar box in the drawer and the letter in the cedar box and Dorothy's voice in the letter saying the thing she had been trying to say for 20 years in the form he could finally receive. He is receiving it. He is going forward. He is carrying what she left. The rarest thing available in a family. He has it. He always had it. He knows it now. That is the steady father. That is everything. That is the end. Over 41 years of marriage, Dorothy said things in specific conversations that I have been returning to since opening the cedar box, because each one said something true that I received partially at the time and am receiving more completely now. The first conversation happened in 1989, 2 years after we opened the first store, when I was considering taking a partner to expand faster than our cash flow allowed. Dorothy sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, "Tell me what you would give up to get the capital." I described the equity split. She said, "And what does a partner get for that equity, besides the capital?" I listed the things. She said, "Henry, you're not describing a partnership. You're describing a transaction that is structured to look like a partnership. A partnership is when two people have aligned interests in the outcome. What you're describing is a transaction in which one person provides capital and the other person does the work, and the person providing the capital has rights that will eventually conflict with the interests of the person doing the work." I said, "That's how business investment works." She said, "I know how business investment works. I'm asking if it's how this business should work. This specific business. Built the specific way we're building it." I did not take the partner. We expanded slower. The expansion took longer, and the business that resulted was entirely ours and was worth $4,200,000 40 years later. She had been right in 1989 about the specific business and the specific way it needed to be built. She had been right about the Hartwell deal through the extension of the same principle. This business, built the specific way it was built, required the specific kind of ownership that produced what it was, and could not survive the transfer of that ownership to a national chain without ceasing to be what it was. The second conversation was in 1995, when Emma was 16 and Diane was 13, and we were having the specific family difficulty that arrives when a 16-year-old and a 13-year-old are both in the house simultaneously, and the 16-year-old's social ease is in visible contrast to the 13-year-old's social difficulty. Emma had friends coming over. Diane had a book. I had said something to Diane about trying harder to participate in the social situation. Dorothy said, after the girls had gone upstairs, "Henry, what are you asking Diane to do?" I said, "I'm asking her to be more social." She said, "You're asking her to be more like Emma." I said, "I'm asking her to make an effort." She said, "She is making an effort. She's reading the book she wants to read instead of performing a social role she doesn't have access to. The effort is in the choice. You're asking her to perform something she can't perform in order to make the room more comfortable for people who find her difficult." I said, "I just think she should try." Dorothy looked at me. "Henry, Diane tells you the truth when Emma doesn't. Diane tells you things Emma won't say. You're asking the person who tells you the truth to become more like the person who manages you. Think about what you're asking." I thought about it. I did not change what I said to Diane that evening, which I regret. But the conversation was available in my memory when I was sitting in the living room a week after Diane walked through the door, and it landed differently with everything I now knew. She had been trying to tell me in 1995. 13-year-old Diane at the kitchen table with her book, and Dorothy across from me saying, "Think about what you're asking." I was asking the wrong thing. For 45 years. The third conversation happened in 2003, when I was considering selling the Riverside store because the market in that neighborhood had shifted and the store was underperforming the network average. Emma had run the numbers and presented a case for the sale. Diane, who was 21 and not yet in her compliance career but already thinking like someone who would be, had said at a family dinner that selling the Riverside store would reduce the network's redundancy and that if the other stores had a bad year the remaining stores would be more exposed. I had received Emma's presentation as the business case. I had received Diane's comment as the concern of someone who did not fully understand the numbers. Dorothy had said, the next morning, Diane was right about the redundancy. You should think about that. I said, she doesn't know the full picture. Dorothy said, she knows the part of the picture you showed her. She's right about what it implies. The Riverside store did not sell. It has been one of the 7 stores for 21 years and it generated the largest revenue increase in the past year under Sandra Park's management. Diane had been right in 2003. Dorothy had told me she was right. I had received it as Dorothy being protective of the difficult daughter rather than as Dorothy telling me something accurate about the business. The 4th conversation was in 2012, and it was the most direct of the 5. Dorothy said, unprompted, at breakfast one morning, I want to ask you something about Emma and Diane. I said, go ahead. She said, who would you call if you found out something was seriously wrong with Walsh Hardware? I said, Emma. She's running the operations. She said, I know she's running the operations. I'm asking who you'd call if you found out something was seriously wrong. I thought about it. Emma, I said again. She said, Diane has a master's degree in financial compliance. She has spent the last 7 years auditing financial irregularities in private companies. She has found, in those 7 years, 3 cases of significant financial fraud that the company's own financial teams had missed. You would call Emma, who manages the operations, rather than Diane, who specializes in finding financial problems. I said, Emma is more familiar with our specific situation. Dorothy looked at me with the expression she wore when I had said something she had expected me to say and that she had already prepared a response to. She said, familiarity is not the same as expertise. Diane has expertise you don't have access to because you don't think to call her. I did not change the answer. I stored the conversation without acting on it for 12 years. In December, when something was seriously wrong with Walsh Hardware, I did not call Diane. Diane called me. She drove 6 hours. She came through the door. Dorothy had been telling me to call Diane for 12 years. Eventually Diane came to me instead. The 5th conversation was in 2019, 2 years before Dorothy died, and it was the last time she tried to tell me directly before the letter. She said, I want to say something about Diane and Emma, and I want you to hear it without defending either of them. I said, go ahead. She said, Emma loves you. Diane loves you. I am not comparing the love. What I am saying is that Emma's love produces, in practice, a relationship in which she manages your perception of her and you find her easy, and Diane's love produces, in practice, a relationship in which she tells you what she sees and you find her difficult. I want you to understand that the ease and the difficulty are not measures of the love. They are measures of the method. And the method that produces ease is not always the method that serves you. I said, I hear what you're saying. She looked at me with the expression she wore when I had said I hear what you're saying as a way of ending a conversation without receiving what the conversation was offering. She said, Henry. I know you hear it. I need you to receive it. I said, I'll think about it. She let it settle. She did not press it. She went back to the book she had been reading. 2 years later she wrote the letter and put it in the cedar box. She had received my I'll think about it as what it was, the end of a conversation I was not ready to finish receiving, and she had found another form. The form she knew I could receive when I was ready. I was ready in December. I received it. I am receiving it still. Every Sunday evening at 7 o'clock I call Diane. This has been true for 8 months and I intend it to be true for as long as we are both available to receive the call. Last Sunday she said, How are you doing? I said, good. Sandra flagged something with the Henderson Street lease renewal that I want your read on. She said, tell me. I told her. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, the landlord is testing whether you need the space more than he needs the tenant. You don't. You have the Birchwood location as a backup within the same service radius. Tell Sandra to let the negotiation sit for 10 days and see what the landlord does when he doesn't hear back. I said, that's my read too. She said, then we agree. Good. She paused. How are you actually doing? I said, I'm okay. I thought about Mom a lot this week. She said, me too. I found a card she sent me for my birthday in 2018. She wrote something in it that I've forgotten. What? I said. She said, she wrote, you are the most reliably yourself person I know, and I mean that as the highest possible compliment. I sat with this for a moment. She was right, I said. I know, Diane said. She usually was. We talked for another 40 minutes. About Francis and the summer job at the stores. About the Henderson Street lease. About what Dorothy would have thought about the new product line Sandra was considering. About the December evening when Diane had driven 6 hours and I had put the pen down. She said, I think about that drive sometimes. Whether I would have come if she hadn't made me promise. I said, would you have? She said, yes. But I might have waited until Monday. Tuesday was too close. But Monday, I might have told myself Monday was enough time. I thought about this. She knew that, I said. That's why she made you promise. Yes, Diane said. She knew exactly what she was doing. She always did. Dorothy Walsh knew exactly what she was doing, right up until the end, and what she was doing at the end was making sure the people who needed to be ready were ready, and the people who needed permission had it, and the people who needed the cedar box would find it when they needed it. The steady father is grateful for her exactness. He is going forward with it. Every Sunday at 7. The difficult daughter. The rarest thing. That is everything. That is the steady father. I want to tell you something about what 14 years as a firefighter teaches you, because it is relevant to this story and to the specific mistake I made with my daughters for 45 years. Firefighting teaches you to trust your team. Not abstractly, specifically. You trust the person on your left because you have trained with them and responded with them and you understand their strengths and their limits in the specific, earned way of people who have been tested together under conditions that do not permit performance to substitute for actual capability. You also learn, in firefighting, the difference between the person who is calm in the emergency and the person who appears calm in the emergency. These are different people producing different states. The person who is calm has processed the situation accurately and is operating from a stable foundation. The person who appears calm is managing their appearance in a way that may or may not reflect accurate processing of the situation. In an emergency, you learn quickly which one you have. The performance is visible under pressure in a way it is not visible in ordinary circumstances. Emma was the person who appeared calm. In the ordinary circumstances of managing Walsh hardware, the appearance and the reality were close enough together that the distinction did not matter. In the extraordinary circumstances of the Hartwell negotiation, they were not close together. Diane was the person who was calm. Not the calm of someone managing their appearance, the calm of someone who had assessed the situation accurately and was responding to it directly. 6 hours of driving at night. The folder on the kitchen table. 4 words. This is not the behavior of someone managing how they appear. This is the behavior of someone who has determined what the situation requires and has done what the situation requires. 14 years of firefighting, and I did not apply what I knew about the difference to my own family. I am applying it now. I look, in every significant situation, for the person who is actually calm rather than the person who appears calm. Sandra Park is actually calm. Diane is actually calm. They both deliver difficult information without drama, because the information is the point and the drama would obscure it. Dorothy was actually calm. She was calm across 41 years of marriage, including the final year of it. She processed the situation of her own death with the specific steady accuracy of someone who has always processed situations accurately, and she used the time available to her to make the preparations that needed to be made. She made me promise about the cedar box. She made Diane promise about the difficult conversations. She wrote the letter. She left everything in the right place. That is actual calm. That is the specific, earned quality of a person who has spent their life developing the capacity to assess situations accurately and act on the assessments rather than on the comfortable version of the assessments. She was the best person I ever knew. She was the calmest. I am trying to be more like her. At 72. At whatever pace the remaining time permits. I want to tell you about a letter Dorothy did not write, because the absence of it is as telling as the letters she did write. There is no letter in the cedar box about Emma. The cedar box contains the letter about the two daughters. It contains a letter about the business. It contains a letter about what Dorothy wanted for the final months of her life and how she wanted the end managed. It contains letters about specific things she wanted me to know. It does not contain a letter to Emma or about Emma in the way the other letters were written. I have thought about this. Dorothy loved Emma. I am certain of this. She loved Emma with the full, clear, non-sentimental love she gave to everything she loved. She saw Emma clearly, the warmth, the competence, the management, and she loved what she saw, complications and all. But she did not write Emma a letter and put it in the cedar box. I think I understand why. The letter in the cedar box was for me. The purpose of the letter was to change the way I received Diane, and it was addressed to me because I was the one who needed to change. Emma did not need a letter from Dorothy to change the way she received Diane. Emma's relationship with Diane was not Dorothy's primary concern. Dorothy's primary concern was my relationship with Diane, and the specific correction that my relationship with Diane required. She used the cedar box for the correction that was most needed. She was precise about what she put in it. She did not write a letter about Emma because I did not need Dorothy to tell me that Emma was warm and competent. I already knew those things. What I needed was the letter she wrote, which told me what I did not know, the distinction between the warmth and the management, and the value of the person who provided neither. She wrote what was needed. Nothing more. Nothing less. That is Dorothy. That is the specific precision of a woman who had spent her life giving people exactly what they needed in exactly the form they needed it, and who applied this precision to the last significant thing she produced. The cedar box has exactly what I needed. Not more. Not less. She was right about that too. I want to close with the image I keep coming back to, because it is the image that contains the whole story in a single scene. A kitchen table. December. A man with a pen in his hand and papers in front of him. The papers represent 40 years of work and 43 people's livelihoods and the specific community service of 7 stores that stock the hex bolts people need and take 25 minutes to talk through the bathroom tile problem. The door opens. A woman comes in from the cold. She is still wearing her coat. There are 6 hours of driving on her face. She looks at the papers on the table. She says, "Dad, don't sign anything." 4 words. He puts the pen down. That is the whole story. That is the entirety of what needed to happen. The 45 years of having it backwards. The 20 years of Dorothy trying to tell him. The cedar box in the closet and the letter inside it and the promise Dorothy had extracted from Diane in February 3 months before she died. All of it produced 4 words and a decision to put the pen down. He put the pen down. Walsh Hardware is still Walsh Hardware. The difficult daughter drove 6 hours. Dorothy was right. She was always right. And the steady father, who had it backwards for 45 years, who found Emma easier for 45 years, who received Dorothy's corrections as sentiment rather than information for 20 years, is going forward now with the full weight of what he finally understands. The rarest thing available in a family. He has it. He always had it. He knows it now. Every Sunday at 7 o'clock. Every first Monday of every month. Every Tuesday morning at the stores. Every morning with the coffee and the photograph in the chair. He is going forward. Carrying what she left. Dorothy was right. She was always right. And now, finally, fully, completely, so is he. Dad. Don't sign anything. 4 words. He put the pen down. He listened. That is the steady father. That is everything. Beyond the letter and the cedar box and the tea in the canister and the chair across from mine, Dorothy left 3 more things that I keep coming back to. The first is a practice. She kept a small notebook on her nightstand, not a journal. She was not a journal person, but a notebook in which she wrote, at the end of each day, one thing she had noticed that she had not noticed before. Not dramatic revelations. Small things. A change in someone's behavior. A pattern she had not previously identified. A gap between what someone said and what they did. She had done this for decades, and the notebooks filled the bottom drawer of her nightstand in a stack that I have not yet been able to sort through. I have started keeping one myself. Not because I believe I can match her quality of attention, I cannot, but because the practice of looking for the thing I had not previously noticed produces, at the end of each day, at least one moment in which I am attending to what is actually there rather than to my existing assumptions about what is there. Last Tuesday at the Riverside store I noticed that one of the longest tenured staff members had changed the location of a specific product category without discussion. In the old days I would have received this as competent initiative and moved on. Now I notice it and ask, what does this change reflect about what she is observing in customer behavior? The question produced 20 minutes of conversation that improved my understanding of what customers in that neighborhood are currently looking for. Dorothy would have had this conversation in 5 minutes. I needed 20. But I had it. She left me the practice. The second is a phrase. She said it in different forms over the years, and the form I remember most clearly is this: pay attention to what doesn't need saying. She meant, the things people don't say, in a situation where you would expect them to say something, are as informative as what they do say. Emma, in 18 months of conversations about the Hartwell deal, never once said, I want to make sure this is the right decision for you, Dad. She never said, let's make sure we've considered every alternative. She said things that were about moving the decision forward. What she didn't say was the information. Diane, in the same period, called twice and I didn't call back. She did not stop trying. What she didn't say, in not stopping trying, was, I understand your discomfort with this conversation and I am adjusting my behavior to make things easier for you. She kept trying because the trying was what the situation required, not because it was comfortable. Pay attention to what doesn't need saying. The absence is the information. The third is a belief. Dorothy believed, and said often enough in enough different forms that I have assembled it from accumulated fragments, that every family has a person who tells the truth. Not a perfect person, not a person who is right about everything or who handles the truth gracefully or who makes the telling of it easy to receive. Just a person who, when the situation requires truth, tells it. She believed that families flourish when this person is recognized and trusted, and that families fail when this person is dismissed and marginalized because the truth they tell is uncomfortable. She believed Diane was this person in our family. She was right. She spent 20 years trying to give me this belief in a form I could receive. She left it in the cedar box in the form I could finally receive. I received it. I believe it now. The steady father believes it. He will always believe it. That is what she left. That is everything. Beyond the letter in the cedar box and the tea in the canister and the chair across from mine, Dorothy left 3 more things that I keep coming back to. The first is a practice. She kept a small notebook on her nightstand, not a journal. She was not a journal person, but a notebook in which she wrote, at the end of each day, one thing she had noticed that she had not noticed before. Not dramatic revelations. Small things. A change in someone's behavior. A pattern she had not previously identified. A gap between what someone said and what they did. She had done this for decades, and the notebooks filled the bottom drawer of her nightstand in a stack that I have not yet been able to sort through. I have started keeping one myself. Not because I believe I can match her quality of attention, I cannot, but because the practice of looking for the thing I had not previously noticed produces, at the end of each day, at least one moment in which I am attending to what is actually there rather than to my existing assumptions about what is there. Last Tuesday at the Riverside store I noticed that one of the longest tenured staff members had changed the location of a specific product category without discussion. In the old days I would have received this as competent initiative and moved on. Now I notice it and ask, what does this change reflect about what she is observing in customer behavior? The question produced 20 minutes of conversation that improved my understanding of what customers in that neighborhood are currently looking for. Dorothy would have had this conversation in 5 minutes. I needed 20. But I had it. She left me the practice. The second is a phrase. She said it in different forms over the years, and the form I remember most clearly is this: pay attention to what doesn't need saying. She meant, the things people don't say, in a situation where you would expect them to say something, are as informative as what they do say. Emma, in 18 months of conversations about the Hartwell deal, never once said, "I want to make sure this is the right decision for you, Dad." She never said, "Let's make sure we've considered every alternative." She said things that were about moving the decision forward. What she didn't say was the information. Diane, in the same period, called twice and I didn't call back. She did not stop trying. What she didn't say, in not stopping trying, was, "I understand your discomfort with this conversation and I am adjusting my behavior to make things easier for you." She kept trying because the trying was what the situation required, not because it was comfortable. Pay attention to what doesn't need saying. The absence is the information. The third is a belief. Dorothy believed, and said often enough in enough different forms that I have assembled it from accumulated fragments, that every family has a person who tells the truth. Not a perfect person, not a person who is right about everything or who handles the truth gracefully or who makes the telling of it easy to receive. Just a person who, when the situation requires truth, tells it. She believed that families flourish when this person is recognized and trusted, and that families fail when this person is dismissed and marginalized because the truth they tell is uncomfortable. She believed Diane was this person in our family. She was right. She spent 20 years trying to give me this belief in a form I could receive. She left it in the cedar box in the form I could finally receive. I received it. I believe it now. The steady father believes it. He will always believe it. That is what she left. That is everything. This past December, 1 year after the December when Diane walked through the door, I visited all 7 stores in the 2 weeks before Christmas. Not because it was in any operational plan. Because it was December and Walsh Hardware has been operating in December for 37 years, and December is the month when the stores are fullest and the staff are most stretched, and the specific qualities that make Walsh Hardware what it is are most visible. I went to each store. I talked to the staff. I talked to customers. I watched what happened when someone came in not knowing exactly what they needed and left with what they needed, and also with the specific information about why they needed it and how to use it, delivered in the patient, knowledgeable way that requires someone who has been in hardware retail long enough to know what they are talking about and who cares about the person they are talking to. I thought about the Hartwell integration model. About the decisions being made at the Regional Operations Center for 47 locations. About the system that optimizes across the network but cannot hold the specific knowledge of what the people in this neighborhood need, held by the person who has been in this store for 11 years and who has been talking to these people for 11 years. You cannot put that in a regional operations center. It lives in the people and the relationships and the specific commitment of an owner who visits in December and who knows the staff's names and who has been building this thing for 40 years. That is what was almost sold. That is what was saved by 4 words and a 6-hour drive. Walsh Hardware is still Walsh Hardware. The difficult daughter drove 6 hours. Dorothy was right. She was always right. The steady father goes to the stores in December. He will go every December for as long as he is able. That is the steady thing. That is everything. That is the steady father. Going forward. Carrying what she left. Dorothy was right about everything, and now finally so is he, and the difficult daughter calls every Sunday, and the stores are still the stores, and the cedar box is in the drawer and the letter is in the cedar box, and the 40 years are still the 40 years, and he put the pen down, and Walsh Hardware is still Walsh Hardware, and Dorothy was right, and the steady father is going forward, and that is everything, and that is the steady father, and that is the end. At 72 years old, after 40 years of building a business and 41 years of marriage and 3 years of widowhood and one December evening that changed the way I understand my own family, I carry the following. The stores. Not as a burden, as the ongoing responsibility of someone who understands what they are protecting and why the protection matters. 7 stores. 45 employees. The specific communities they serve. The Tuesday morning when someone needs hex bolts and comes to Walsh Hardware because Walsh Hardware has them and because the person behind the counter has been there long enough to know why that size matters. The cedar box. In the drawer of my desk. The letter inside it. Dorothy's voice in the letter, saying the things she had been trying to say for 20 years and that I received when I needed it in the form she had known would reach me. The Sunday calls. Diane at 7 o'clock. The specific mixture of business and family and honest assessment that has become the most important hour of my week. She told me last Sunday that the Henderson Street landlord had called back, as she predicted, within the 10 days, with a better offer. She said, "Do you want my read on the counter?" I said, "Yes." She gave it. It was precise and accurate. I told Sandra. We made the counter. The landlord accepted. 45 years of finding her difficult. 8 months of receiving her correctly. The difference is not in Diane. The difference is in me. The photograph on the counter. Dorothy in the first store. 1987, laughing. Exactly where she was supposed to be. I look at it every morning and I think about what she saw that I did not see, and I think about what I see now that I could not see then. The gap is closing. Slowly. At the pace available. The letter Dorothy did not write to Emma, which is also something I carry, the knowledge that Emma is rebuilding something and that the rebuilding takes the time it takes and that I am holding the space for it without forcing a timeline. Dorothy would say, "Be honest while it's taking it." I am being honest. The Tuesday calls are real. The space is real. The promise Dorothy extracted from Diane in February. That Diane would tell me the things I needed to hear even if they were unwelcome. That she would keep telling me even when I told her she was being negative. She kept the promise. She came through the door. The 40 years themselves. The hex bolts and the roof leak in 2003 and the reduced salary in 2008 and the Tuesday morning regulars and the specific accumulated commitment of a business that has been built with the understanding that what you build is a form of relationship and relationships require sustained honest attention. I carry all of it. Going forward. That is the steady thing. That is what the steady father carries. That is the steady father. Frances came for her summer job in July. She was 15 years old and she had Diane's directness and Dorothy's eyes, and the specific combination of those two things produced a 15-year-old who noticed things and said what she noticed without managing how the saying landed. Her first day at the Riverside store, she spent 30 minutes helping a customer find the right caulk for a window installation. The customer left satisfied. Frances came to find me afterward and said, "We should have more of the silicone version in stock. I talked to 3 people today who needed it and we only had the acrylic." I said, "Do you know the difference?" She said, "I read the product descriptions while I was helping the first customer." I told Gerald Park. Gerald adjusted the stock order. The silicone caulk has been selling better than the acrylic since July. Frances is 15. She has been at Walsh Hardware for 2 months. She noticed something in 30 minutes that the store had not noticed, and she said it directly without packaging it as a concern or a suggestion or a question. She stated it as information because it was information. She is her mother's daughter. She is Dorothy's granddaughter. She is the rarest thing available in a family. I told Diane about the caulk incident on the Sunday call after it happened. Diane said, "She's been doing that her whole life. She just never had a place to do it that valued it." I said, "She has one now." Diane was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mom would have liked seeing this." "She would have," I said. "She would have known it was coming." "She always did," Diane said. "She always did." Dorothy Walsh knew exactly what she was looking at when she looked at her family, and she knew what was coming, and she prepared for it with the specific practical precision of someone who understood that love is not only a feeling but a set of preparations made on behalf of the people you love for the things you can see coming that they cannot yet see. She saw it coming. She prepared for it. The difficult daughter kept her promise. The father put the pen down. The 15-year-old noticed the caulk. Walsh Hardware is still Walsh Hardware. Dorothy was right. She was always right. The steady father goes forward knowing this. He will always go forward knowing this. That is enough. That is everything. That is the steady father. Henry Walsh built 7 hardware stores over 40 years and almost lost them on a Tuesday evening in December when he was holding a pen and about to sign. His difficult daughter drove 6 hours because Tuesday was too close to wait. She put a folder on the table. She said 4 words. He put the pen down. He opened the cedar box the following Sunday and read the letter his wife had written 8 months before she died, which said the thing she had been trying to say for 20 years in the form she had known could reach him. He received it. He is carrying it. He goes to the stores on Tuesday mornings. He calls Diane every Sunday at 7. He looks at the photograph on the counter every morning. He carries the letter in the drawer of the desk, and the cedar box holds the letter, and Dorothy was right about everything, and he finally knows it, and Walsh Hardware is still Walsh Hardware, and the difficult daughter is the rarest thing available in a family, and he has her, and he always had her, and he knows it now, and the steady father is going forward carrying what Dorothy left, and that is everything, and that is the steady father, and that is the end. 1 year and 2 months after Diane came through the door, this is the full accounting of everything. Walsh Hardware, 7 stores, 45 employees, annual revenue up 14% from the prior year, a managing director who tells me what is wrong before it costs me anything, a financial advisor who now requires independent meetings with clients before any family member transaction, a summer employee named Frances who noticed the caulk situation in 30 minutes and whom I intend to hire again next summer and the summer after that for as long as she wants to come. Dorothy, in the cedar box in the drawer of my desk, in the tea in the canister, in the photograph on the counter, in the chair across from mine in the living room that I have not moved and do not intend to move. In Diane, who has her directness. In Frances, who has her eyes. In the letter that said the thing she had been trying to say for 20 years in the form she had known would reach me. In the practice I am keeping in the small notebook on my own nightstand, looking each evening for the thing I had not previously noticed. Emma, Tuesday calls, civil and careful, the rebuilding continuing at the pace available. She said something on the last call that I want to include here because it is the truest thing she has said to me since December. She said, "Dad, I know what I cost you. I'm not asking you to minimize it. I'm asking you to let me be the person who tries to repair it." I said, "That's all I'm asking too. We will see where the trying goes." Dorothy would say, "Let it take the time it takes." It is taking the time it takes. Diane, every Sunday at 7, every first Monday of the month, every time something requires the specific professional attention she brings to financial questions and the specific personal attention she brings to the questions that aren't about finance. She drove 6 hours because Tuesday was too close. She has been driving toward me, in every form available to her, for 42 years. I am finally receiving the direction she is coming from. The stores on Tuesday mornings. The photograph every morning. The calls every Sunday. The cedar box in the drawer. The letter in the cedar box. The chair across from mine. That is what remains. That is what is being carried forward. The difficult daughter is the rarest thing available in a family. He has her. He always had her. He knows it now. Walsh Hardware is still Walsh Hardware. Dorothy was right. The steady father is going forward. Going forward. Carrying what she left. Every Sunday at 7. Every first Monday. Every Tuesday at the stores. Every morning with the coffee and the photograph in the chair and the specific ordinary continuation of a life built with the specific honest attention of 2 people who understood what they were building and why it mattered. She said, "Build the thing that lasts, not the thing that looks like it lasts." He built the thing that lasts. She was right that it was worth building. She was always right. The steady father knows it. He will always know it. That is everything. That is the steady father. That is the end. She told him for 20 years. He received it eventually. She knew he would. That is what patience is, in the form available to someone who loves a person who receives things slowly. You keep telling them, in every form available, and you trust that the form will eventually match the readiness and the truth will land. She was patient for 20 years. She wrote the letter when she understood that conversation had run its course and that the written form was what remained available. She left the cedar box in the closet and made him promise not to open it until he needed it and trusted that he would need it and that he would keep the promise. He kept the promise. He needed it. He opened it. He received it. The difficult daughter drove 6 hours and said 4 words. The pen went down. Walsh Hardware is still Walsh Hardware. Dorothy was right about everything. The steady father knows it now. He is going forward. He is carrying what she left. The rarest thing available in a family. He has it. He always had it. He finally knows it. Going forward. That is the steady father. That is everything. That is the end. Henry Walsh is 72 years old, and he knows things now that he did not know on the Tuesday evening in December when he was holding a pen. He knows that the daughter who drives 6 hours in the dark on a Monday night because Tuesday is too close is the daughter to call when something is seriously wrong. He knows that the daughter who manages the room and the relationship and the warmth is loved and valuable and not the one to call when something is seriously wrong. He knows that his wife tried to tell him this for 20 years and that he received it as sentiment and that she anticipated this failure of reception and wrote it down in a cedar box and left it where he would find it when he was ready. He knows that ready arrived in December and that 2 weeks later the cedar box was open and the letter was read and the full weight of 20 years of patient truth-telling landed all at once in the bedroom of a house where Dorothy was no longer present and where her voice was present in the letter she had left. He knows that the rarest thing available in a family is the person who tells you the truth regardless of what it costs them, and that he has this person in Diane who drives 6 hours when she has to and who calls every Sunday at 7 and who reviews the accounts on the first Monday of every month with the specific honest attention of someone who loves the outcome more than the relationship's comfort and who has always been this way and will always be this way and who drove 6 hours in December when she had every reason to decide it was someone else's problem. He knows it. He will always know it. He is going forward with it. The stores are still the stores. Dorothy was right. The steady father knows it. That is everything. That is the steady father. That is the end. Going forward carrying what she left. The rarest thing. He has it. He knows it. That is enough. That is the steady father. The end. The first store opened in March of 1987 and Gerald came in for hex bolts and came back every Tuesday for 31 years, and the second store opened in 1991 and the third in 1995 and the fourth in 1999 and the fifth in 2005 and the sixth in 2010 and the seventh in 2014, and Dorothy co-signed the loan for the first one and was present for every opening, in every expansion, in every difficult year, in the 2008 recession when the salary was reduced rather than the staff, and the Saturday roof leak. In 2003 when everyone stayed until 10, and the hundreds of ordinary Tuesdays when someone needed something and Walsh Hardware had it and the person behind the counter knew what it was for. 40 years of that, and Dorothy always right and Diane always honest, and the pen almost going down on a Tuesday evening in December when Diane drove 6 hours because Tuesday was too close. He put the pen down. He opened the cedar box. He received the letter. He calls Diane every Sunday. He goes to the stores on Tuesdays. Walsh Hardware is still Walsh Hardware. Dorothy was right about everything. The steady father knows it. He will always know it. Going forward. Carrying what she left. The rarest thing available in a family. He has it. He always had it. He knows it now. That is enough. That is everything. That is the steady father. That is the end. The honest end. The only end available to a story like this one, which is a story about 40 years and 7 stores and 2 daughters in a cedar box and a woman who was right about everything and a man who received it eventually, and a December evening when 4 words saved 40 years. Dad. Don't sign anything. He put the pen down. That is the steady father. That is the end. Frances Walsh Brennan went back to school in September and she is coming back next summer. She told Diane she liked it. Diane told me on the Sunday call. I said, good. She said, she wants to understand how the supplier relationships work. I said, I'll explain them to her. Diane said, she'll remember everything you tell her. I know she will. She has Dorothy's eyes and she notices things and she says what she notices, and she is 15 years old and she will be 25 years old and she will be 35 years old, and at some point the question of what happens to Walsh Hardware after Henry Walsh is no longer here to tend, it will have an answer that involves the people who have been learning it and caring about it and who cannot tell you one thing about it that they have not verified. Dorothy would have seen this coming. She probably did see it coming. She was right about everything, and the things she was right about continue to be right even after she is gone, because the truth does not expire when the person who holds it dies. The difficult daughter is the rarest thing available in a family. He has her. He has Emma too. He has both kinds of truth now. Going forward with both. Carrying what Dorothy left. She was right about everything. The steady father knows it. He will always know it. That is the steady father. That is everything. That is the end. The pen was in his hand and the papers were on the table, and 40 years of work were about to become someone else's for 31% less than they were worth, with $336,000 going to his son-in-law, and he was about to sign because the easy daughter had managed him toward the signature across 18 months of warm professional presentations, and he trusted her because she was easy to trust, and the difficult daughter had been trying to call him for 2 months and he had not called back because the difficult daughter made things harder and he preferred smooth water, and the smooth water was about to cost him everything. And then Diane came through the door still in her coat, 6 hours of driving on her face, and she looked at the papers and she said, "Dad, don't sign anything," and he put the pen down, and that was the whole of it, and it was enough, and it saved 40 years and 43 people's livelihoods, and the Hex-Bolt customer and the 15-year-old who noticed the caulk in the specific community service of 7 stores that stock what people need and know what they need it for. And Dorothy was right, and the cedar box was opened and the letter was read, and Diane calls every Sunday and the first Monday meetings happen, and Sandra Park tells Henry what is wrong before it costs him anything, and Frances is coming back next summer, and Walsh Hardware is still Walsh Hardware, and the steady father is going forward carrying everything. Dorothy left, which is more than he understood when she left it and more than he can fully account for now, and that is the steady father, and that is everything, and that is the end. Dad. Don't sign anything. 4 words. He put the pen down. Walsh Hardware is still Walsh Hardware. Dorothy was right. The steady father knows it. He will always know it. Going forward. That is the steady father. That is everything. That is the end. Dorothy Walsh built something that outlasted her. Not the stores, Henry built the stores. Dorothy built the understanding that the stores required. She built it patiently across 41 years of marriage, through the 5 conversations Henry has been returning to, in the letters she wrote and did not send, in the letter she left in the cedar box, and the call she made to Diane in February 3 months before she died, and the promise she extracted, and the specific preparation she performed with the time available to her in the final year of her life. She built the understanding and she distributed it to the people who needed it, and she trusted them to use it, and they used it, and Walsh Hardware is still Walsh Hardware. That is what she built. The understanding. Not the stores, the understanding of what the stores required and what the family required and what Henry required in the form he could receive it and when he would be ready to receive it and how to make it available in that form and at that moment. She built all of it. From 41 years of paying attention to what is actually there. The steady father is going forward with everything she built. Every Sunday at 7. Every first Monday. Every Tuesday at the stores. Every morning with the coffee and the photograph. Going forward. Carrying what she built. Dorothy was right about everything. The steady father knows it. He will always know it. The rarest thing. Walsh Hardware. Dad, don't sign anything. 4 words. He put the pen down. That is the steady father. That is everything. The end. Walsh Hardware opened in 1987 and is open today. Gerald came for hex bolts in 1987 and came back every Tuesday for 31 years, and there are other Geralds now who come for the thing they need from people who have been in the stores long enough to know what the thing is for. 43 people whose average tenure is 12 years and who will have longer tenures because the stores were not sold in December, and because the difficult daughter drove 6 hours, and because the steady father put the pen down, and because Dorothy left the letter in the cedar box, and because Diane kept her promise, and because Francis noticed the caulk, and because Sandra Park tells Henry what is wrong, and because the first Monday meetings happen in, because the Sunday calls happen and because Dorothy was right and the steady father knows it and is going forward with everything she left, which includes the stores and the letter and the tea and the canister and the chair across from his and the photograph on the counter and Diane every Sunday and Francis next summer, and the specific ongoing commitment of a man who understands now what he is protecting and why the protection matters, and who will go to the stores on Tuesday mornings, for as long as the Tuesdays permit. Going forward. She held it for 41 years, and she transferred it to the cedar box, and the cedar box transferred it to Henry Walsh, and Henry Walsh is transferring it now through the Sunday calls and the first Monday meetings and the Tuesday mornings at the stores and the summer employment of a 15-year-old who notices things. The rarest thing available in a family multiplies when you receive it correctly. He is receiving it correctly now. Going forward. Carrying what she left. Walsh Hardware is still Walsh Hardware. Dorothy was right. The steady father knows it. He will always know it. That is everything. That is the steady father. That is the end. Dorothy had a philosophy about businesses and about families that she never stated as a philosophy, but that emerged clearly if you paid attention to how she operated across 41 years. The philosophy was this: the things worth having require sustained honest attention and will not survive the substitution of comfortable inattention for honest attention, no matter how long the comfortable inattention has been in place. She applied this to the business from the first day, standing in the rented space in 1987 with $12,000 in a commercial loan and saying, "Now we need to make it worth what we just committed to." She applied it to the marriage across 4 decades of sustained honest attention to the specific person she was married to, including his specific failures of attention and his specific patterns of comfortable inattention and his specific tendency to find Emma easier and Diane harder, and to not ask the question of what easier and harder were actually measuring. She applied it to the family she was leaving behind in the final year of her life, the conversations she had, the promises she extracted, the letters she wrote, the cedar box she left in the closet with the instruction to open it only when needed. She applied it to everything. The things worth having require sustained honest attention, and the substitution of comfort for attention is the specific mechanism by which things that matter are lost. Henry Walsh substituted comfort for attention for 18 months. His wife had spent 41 years trying to prevent this and had spent the last year of her life preparing for it, and in December a daughter drove 6 hours and said 4 words, and the comfortable substitution ended and the honest attention resumed, and Walsh Hardware is still Walsh Hardware, and it required all of that to keep it so, and Dorothy was right that it was worth keeping and right about everything else, and the steady father knows this, and is going forward carrying what she left and that is the whole of it, and it is enough, and it is everything, and it is the steady father, and it is the end. Going forward. The stores are still the stores. Dorothy was right. He knows it now. He will always know it. The rarest thing available in a family. He has it. He always had it. He knows it now. That is enough. That is everything. That is the steady father. The end. The honest end. Going forward carrying what she left. Dorothy was right. The difficult daughter drove 6 hours. He put the pen down. Walsh Hardware is still Walsh Hardware. The end. On the first Monday of every month, Diane reviews the Walsh Hardware accounts on a video call that begins at 10 o'clock and runs for 2 hours and produces 3 to 5 specific recommendations that Sandra Park implements within 2 weeks and that have improved the business in the 12 months of their implementation in ways that the preceding 8 years of management did not improve them. The improvement is not because Diane is smarter than Emma was. It is because Diane tells Henry what is wrong with the accounts and Emma told Henry what was good about them. Both of them were telling the truth about what they noticed. The difference is in what each of them noticed and what each of them said about what they noticed. Emma noticed what was working and said so. Diane notices what is not working and says so. Walsh Hardware needed both and for 8 years had only one of them, and for the 12 months of the first Monday meetings has had both because Henry calls Emma on Tuesdays about the things that are working and calls Diane on Sundays about everything, and the first Monday meetings cover the full picture, which is what the accounts require. Dorothy would have said, both of them told you the truth. You needed both kinds of truth. The mistake was not trusting Emma. The mistake was not also trusting Diane. He trusts them both now. In the specific ways their specific truths require. That is the correction. That is what the cedar box produced. That is what Dorothy left him when she could no longer be present to provide both kinds of truth herself. He is carrying it. Walsh Hardware is still Walsh Hardware. Carrying what she left. Dorothy was right. She was always right. The steady father knows it. The rarest thing available in a family. He has it. He always had it. He knows it now. That is the steady father. That is everything. That is the end. She was born in 1949 and she married Henry Walsh in 1983, and she co-signed the loan for the first store in 1986 and stood in the rented space in March of 1987 and said, now we need to make it worth what we just committed to, and she was right about that and right about everything else that followed for 41 years, and she died in the spring of 2021 with the specific dignity of a woman who had decided how she wanted to face the end, and she left a cedar box in the back of the closet and a letter in the cedar box and a promise from Diane and a photograph on the counter and a chair across from Henry's and a tea blend in the canister, and 41 years of a marriage that produced 2 daughters, one of whom drives 6 hours when she has to and one of whom is rebuilding something on Tuesdays, in a business that is still Walsh Hardware, and a steady father who knows now what he is carrying and who is going forward with it every morning, every Sunday, every first Monday, every Tuesday at the stores. Dorothy Walsh. Born 1949. Right about everything. Still going forward through everything she left. The steady father carries her forward. He will always carry her forward. That is the steady father. That is everything. The rarest thing available in a family. He has it. He always had it. He knows it now. Dad. Don't sign anything. He put the pen down. Walsh Hardware is still Walsh Hardware. Dorothy was right. Going forward. That is the steady father. The end. The difficult daughter is 42 years old and she reviews the Walsh Hardware accounts on the first Monday of every month, and she calls her father every Sunday at 7, and she drove 6 hours on a Monday evening in December because the closing was on Tuesday and Tuesday was too close to wait, and she put a folder on a kitchen table and said 4 words, and he put the pen down, and she is the rarest thing available in a family, and he has known her for 42 years and is receiving her. correctly for 12 months and intends to receive her correctly for every month that follows, and Dorothy was right about her and right about everything, and the cedar box is open and the letter has been read and the pen is down, and Walsh Hardware is still Walsh Hardware, and the steady father is going forward, and that is the steady father, and that is everything, and that is the end. Dorothy was right. He knows it now. He will always know it. Going forward. Carrying what she left. The rarest thing. He has it. Walsh Hardware. The pen is down. The end. Henry Walsh is a retired firefighter who built 7 hardware stores and almost lost them in December, and did not lose them because his difficult daughter drove 6 hours on a Monday night when the closing was Tuesday, and she had always been this way for 42 years of being received as difficult, which was actually the specific form available to her of not being able to produce the comfortable version at the expense of the honest version, and Dorothy had seen this from the beginning and had tried for 20 years to give Henry the understanding, and had written it in the cedar box in the form he could receive, and he received it in December, and he is going forward with it now. He puts it into practice every Sunday at 7 when Diane calls, and every first Monday when the accounts are reviewed, and every Tuesday morning when he goes to the stores, and every morning when he looks at the photograph, and every evening when he looks at the chair across from his. He is practicing the correction every day. Getting better at it every day. Not perfectly, that is not available. But better. More fully. With the specific honest attention of a man who understands now what he is paying attention to and why. Dorothy would say, that is enough. That is what she always said when something was being done correctly. Not praise, sufficiency. That is enough. It is enough. He is going forward. Carrying what she left. Dorothy was right about everything. He knows it. He will always know it. The rarest thing available in a family. The difficult daughter who tells you the truth. He has her. He always had her. He knows it now. And Walsh Hardware is still Walsh Hardware. And that is enough. That is everything. That is the steady father. The pen is down. Going forward. That is the end. There are mornings in the kitchen when the coffee is the same brand, and the chair is the same chair, and the photograph is on the counter, and the light comes through the same window it has always come through, and everything is ordinary in the specific way that things are ordinary when they are exactly what they have always been, and also different because the person who made them what they have always been is no longer there in person, but is still there in everything the kitchen contains. Including the knowledge Henry Walsh carries now of who his daughters are and what each of them offers and how to receive what each of them offers correctly. Dorothy built that knowledge in him across 41 years. She transferred it through the cedar box and the letter and the promise and the specific preparation of the final year of her life. He received it eventually. He is carrying it now. Every morning with the coffee. Every Sunday at 7. Every first Monday. Every Tuesday at the stores. The difficult daughter is the rarest thing available in a family. Walsh Hardware is still Walsh Hardware. Dorothy was right. The steady father is going forward. That is the steady father. That is everything. The end. The hex bolts Gerald needed in 1987 are still in stock. The staff member who knows what they are for has been at the Riverside store for 11 years. The specific knowledge of why that size matters has not been transferred to a regional operations center because Walsh Hardware is still Walsh Hardware, and Henry Walsh still goes on Tuesday mornings and still answers the question about the bathroom tile substrate and still knows the staff by name and still gets the rental deposit into the property account and still calls Diane on Sundays and still sits across from Dorothy's empty chair on Thursday evenings and still looks at the photograph on the counter every morning. He is going forward. With everything she left. Dorothy was right about everything. He knows it now. the rarest thing available in a family. He has it. Walsh Hardware. Dad, don't sign anything. He put the pen down. Going forward. That is the steady father. That is enough. That is everything. That is the end. Going forward is what the steady father does. He goes forward on Tuesday mornings to the stores and on Sunday evenings to the call and on the first Monday to the meeting and every morning to the kitchen with the coffee and the photograph in the window and the chair across from his and the specific ordinary continuation of a life built with someone who was right about everything and who left what she left in the form he could receive and who prepared Diane to keep her promise and who prepared Henry to receive Diane and who built into both of them and into the cedar box and into the letter and into the specific preparation of the final year the shape of what December would require, and December required a 6-hour drive and 4 words and a folder on a kitchen table and the pen going down, and Walsh Hardware is still Walsh Hardware because of all of that, because of Dorothy being right about everything, and going forward is what the steady father does now and what he will always do, and it is enough and it is everything and it is the steady father and it is the end.